All right, everybody. Welcome to the third annual Yeah But Still Halloween special. I'm your host, Jack, and you are listening to part one of a two-part series this year. That's right, I've had to break this up into 2 episodes because, quite frankly, I ended up getting more stories than I expected. For those of you who are listening to this special for the first time, haven't heard one of these before, I've been doing these for the last 3 years, and what I do is I just simply ask the listeners of this podcast if they've experienced anything paranormal, supernatural, or even just something frightening that would make for a good Halloween story. And every single year, I'm constantly amazed by the amount of responses I get. Hundreds in my inbox. And this is going on year 3. And these are all people that listen to our podcast, which I've had the pleasure of meeting a good amount of people who listen to this, and they're all very normal people. I would have a harder time believing the audience of, like, let's say, Alex Jones or Joe Rogan in terms of just blindly asking people if they've experienced something paranormal. But everybody I've talked to for this, they're pretty normal, just normal, level-headed people, and they're all very, very trustworthy. And anybody that doesn't seem trustworthy, it doesn't make it on this episode. I spend a lot of time vetting the stories, too. But yeah, this year, I ended up recording almost 9 hours of content. I spent pretty much every day of the last month working on these episodes, because, quite frankly, I like doing this. I like doing these stories. It's an absolute labor of love, so please spread the word, tell your friends about these episodes, send them around, whatever you can. I just like the fact that people listen to these. But I bring up all of that to not just pat myself on the back. I just think it's really worth noting how many responses we get and what that says about this stuff. I mean, especially for me. I started doing this in a fun way, you know? Oh, maybe I'll get some, like, spooky stories, you know, and I mean, I've always liked hearing them. I've always liked hearing ghost stories, paranormal things. But I was always able to compartmentalize it, you know? Oh, like, here's a spooky ghost story. Like, I'll believe it while the story's being told, and then after the story's over, I don't believe in ghosts anymore. Even if I do kind of, in the back of my head, believe in it. But as time goes on doing these episodes, that becomes harder and harder. Because, I mean, really think about it. Like, this is just the people who listen to this podcast, and every single year, I get hundreds of responses, and it's not just like, oh, I heard a spooky sound in my house. If you've listened to these episodes before, the range of things that have happened, I mean, from UFOs to, like, seeing Sasquatch up close, dozens of ghost stories, you name it. We've gotten stories from all over the world, and I talk to these people myself, and I grill them too if there's anything I doubt or want to know more about. For me, it's like, how do I explain that? I have so many people who have told me this stuff, that they've seen these things, and I believe them. You know, if I didn't believe them, I wouldn't put them on the episode. But then that kind of leaves me in a difficult place when I'm walking around at night in the dark and I have to tell myself that, you know, there's nothing to be scared of. It's hard, you know? So in a way, I'm looking forward to when this is all finally done and I have these 2 episodes posted, because it does start to mess with your head a little bit. You know, I've been interested in this stuff since I was a kid. Literally, when I was 15, I made a documentary about a haunted theater in my town. For me, this stuff, it's always been, I'm really interested in it. I go chasing it, and then I get close enough, and once you get close, you realize, like, oh, I don't want any part of this. I don't want any part of this. Why was I chasing it in the first place? I do not want this in my life at all. And, you know, when you dive headfirst into this stuff, it messes with your head. Even if it's just basic paranoia, it's on your mind and you start seeing things out of the corner of your eye. There's that. But then I also, to an extent, I think the closer you get to this stuff, the more you can attract this type of stuff to you. And I might run the risk of sounding like I've lost my mind a bit by telling this next story. But something happened to me while I was making this episode. And it's not a huge deal, but I thought it was very, very, very weird, and it freaked me out at the time. I just thought it would be worth telling to get this episode started. I was on my morning run, which I pretty much run every single day at this point. I run in the morning like sunrise, and I have a real routine down at this point. Like nothing, there's no variables in these runs. I do the same route. It's honestly super boring now because just nothing changes, nothing happens. I just do the same thing every day. I don't even I turn my mind off and nothing happens, and then I go home and shower and start my day. But I was on a run a couple weeks ago, and I'm running along this neighborhood street. And it's kind of like a weird foggy morning too. It's kind of strange outside. And all of a sudden I'm just hit with like the worst feeling I've ever had, which is unusual. I mean, I never feel bad on these runs, but I'm hit with like this crazy nausea, like dizzy. Like I didn't think I was going to throw up. It was like almost worse than that. It was like my stomach and my whole body felt awful. And it came with like this sense of dread too. And I'm telling you, it's almost like I walked into this. It's like I walked into a wall of horrible feeling. And it was the weirdest thing ever. I just stopped running. I immediately like bent over and was just like, what the hell is this? Just something felt very seriously wrong. And it was like an overwhelming dread along with the nausea. So I had no choice. I was just started walking home, I guess. I just figured I would just start walking because I certainly wasn't going to run, and I had nowhere else. I had to walk somewhere. And so I start walking, and I probably walked just the length of one house and then reached the end of the street, this intersection in the neighborhood. And I look to my left, and what I see is several ambulances and a fire truck outside of this house on this empty street. And there's a family standing in the lawn, and they look very upset. And I see paramedics carrying a body out of the house and into the ambulance. And I mean, I just stopped in my tracks. It was crazy. And I mean, it would have been a strange sight anyway, you know, just to run into that. And I just looked at it, and it was very strange, and I kept walking. And after I made it probably one more house length, I swear to God, the nausea went away. Like, I felt fine after I walked like a couple houses away. And man, that was really, really weird. Like, I felt very, very conflicted. I was happy that I felt better all of a sudden, but the fact that I felt better once I walked like 100 feet from that, I just didn't like that. It was not a big deal. I don't know what that was. I really don't know what that was. But I wanted no part of that. Maybe it was just some weird coincidence. I don't really know. It doesn't matter to me. What mattered in experiencing that is just a reminder that as interested in this stuff as I may be, I don't actually want any part of it myself. I don't want a part of it, and I don't envy these people who have experienced this stuff. And you're going to see in this episode, I mean, I've talked to a range of people who have gone through a variety of different things, but there's people who have just experienced one thing in a moment and never experienced it again. But later on, you'll meet some people in this two-part series that have dealt with things their entire life. And just getting a little sample of what that might be like, I just want no part of it myself. So just one of those reminders, you know, I always find myself chasing this stuff and pursuing it, but at the end of the day, this is not something that I actually want to catch. I want no part of it. So I should get this episode started because I'm very excited to put these behind me and go back to hopefully living a life of ignorance. I want to welcome you to part 1 of this 2-part series. These are all stories from listeners of this very podcast. These are people that have at least one thing in common with you, which I think is important to remember when you're listening to this, because if this stuff happened to them, it could just as easily happen to you. And with that being said, welcome to the 3rd annual Yeah But Still Halloween special. This is part 1. So I'm going to start off this episode, part 1 of the Halloween special, with a story from a guy named Jordan, who hails from Bozeman, Montana, currently, a place where I actually went to school for 1 year. But this happened to him when he was a child. Apparently Jordan was a bad boy back then, and ended up getting sent to a military school, which did not sound very fun. In fact, it sounds pretty traumatizing in terms of a place that you could be sent to, a type of place that I guess most of us are probably surprised to find out still exists. And this is a well-rounded story, I think, because it has paranormal elements, but also it's just a strange tale and a unique setting. So I'm going to let Jordan take it from here.
My name is Jordan Sykes. I am a civil engineer, live in Bozeman, Montana. I grew up in Atlanta, from the South, just kind of generally. My parents live in Western North Carolina. And this story takes place about coming up on 15 years ago. I'm getting old, in a town called Port Gibson, Mississippi. So I found myself in military school at Port Gibson, Mississippi, which is a very, very strange place, really for anybody, but especially if you're coming from suburban Atlanta, where I grew up. And I was just kind of a bit of a, honestly, I was just a bit of a pothead, and like made bad grades, and like was like, Dad, I hate you, one of those kids, really angsty teen. And Port Gibson, Mississippi is a very small, very impoverished community. When I was there, the mayor's primary job was working at Subway. It was one of the only places in the area that didn't get burned in the Civil War, which is kind of like its local claim to fame. But also, I guess, probably the thing that it's most known for is this school, Chamberlain Hunt Academy. Chamberlain Hunt Academy is a military school that operated from sometime pre-Civil War 1800s, I don't know the exact date off the top of my head, up until just a few years ago. This was the type of place that was a lot like, almost like prison in the movies. Just super violent, like everyone's trying to be like top dog, like mess with everybody. And also, it's somewhere, this was not a military school that people were going to for because they wanted to enter a career in the military or anything. This was pretty purely punishment. And the other kicker about this place that was very unique is that it is a Christian military boarding school, which, oftentimes the military and the Christian perspectives did not necessarily jive, but they made it work anyway. This place sucked, and it had sucked for 200 years. I mean, a long lineage of just pissed off kids not wanting to be there, having to do tons of push-ups and run. Over the course of those years, too, a number of students had died on the campus. At some point, I think in like maybe the 1940s-ish. And again, anybody can look this up. But there was a fire on campus and I think a couple students died. And then of course, just, a school that's been around that long, you had students get sick and pass, you had a couple suicides and that kind of thing, especially at a place like this that no one wanted to be at. One of the rules they had that was honestly, even for military school, felt a little over the top is that at about 10:30 p.m., they would play taps, and you weren't allowed to leave your room. And that's like, obviously to keep you from like going into your buddy's room and like fighting or doing drugs or whatever trouble you might be getting into. But the part that really just sucked about it is you couldn't go to the bathroom without being paddled, because this school also had corporal punishment. And this school is like staffed by fucking ex-Green Berets that live to just spank the shit out of like a 16-year-old asshole kid. So just to like show like the military versus Christian thing, the first time I ever got paddled, I don't even know what I did, but they have you line up against the president's office and you can hear the kids in front of you getting paddled, like they close the door, whop, whop, and then you hear them like leaving. And it's, this is a super hyper masculine, like, I swear I'm not gay, I swear I'm tough type place. And, you see these kids coming out like tearing up because they just got whooped. And like the first time I went in to get paddled, I was towards the end of the line. I look at the desk. They lean you over a desk to paddle you. And there's fucking tears on it from the people that got spanked before me. And right before they paddle you, this really kind of like good cop, bad cop dynamic. There was this really cool staff member there. He would hold your hand and pray with you for the paddling to like make you a better kid. It would be like, hey, Lord, please guide this paddle to make Cadet Sykes a better kid. He wants to be good. Please help this paddle straighten him out. And you're just like, what the fuck? I brought up paddling to inform the fact that the consequence of leaving your room at night is paddling. You get, they call it licks. You get 3 licks or whatever if you're caught at night. But the way they catch you is, I said there's 4 dorms and there's, 2 or 3 stories per dorm. In the corner of the main hallway of each dorm, they had a security camera. Now, mind you, this is like 15 years ago. This isn't like HD. I mean, this is kind of almost the equivalent of like game cameras like deer hunters use today. And basically what this would be, there's a camera in the corner of the hallway, and it is a motion activated camera that just takes pictures, I think, every 2 or 3 seconds. And we also had what was called a TAC officer that lived in the building. Each dorm had a TAC officer that was like, quote unquote, an adult. Looking back, it was like a 21-year-old, but they were the ones who were, kind of responsible for, maintaining order, at night when we're in the dorms and everything. But so they had these security cameras, and they would have, if you are out of your room at night, they snapped a picture. And so one of the things that would happen though is, this is like a pretty shitty camera that takes, a kind of shitty, grainy, black and white image every 3 seconds. A lot of times kids are straight up running to the bathroom. It's 99% people going to the bathroom, like not going into each other's rooms and stuff. So maybe maybe it's a really grainy picture, and then it's all basically like, 90% white kids with shaved heads, generally about the same height, all in the same uniform. So with this kind of shitty camera, a lot of times they couldn't tell, oh, that's Cadet Sykes, or, that's my buddy, or that's this other guy. They would just be like, okay, somebody was out. And, the whole basis of like military discipline is on group punishment, because, any kid that's at this school would look any of these adults in the face and just say like, fuck you. Just like pretty rowdy bunch of dudes. But when you do that and then they punish, your 50 best friends, and then on top of that, now these kids are all pissed off at you and they might, want to kick your ass or something later. The whole group punishment thing is just kind of like the way they get these really, really rebellious kids to act right. And so what they would do if they had one of these pictures that they couldn't suss out who's who, at lunch, in the middle of the school day, they would call you out. Just basically, they'd say, Bravo Company, First Platoon, come out. And so you'd leave the cafeteria and you'd form up, and they would hand off a printout of of a picture, maybe a couple pictures of whoever was out in the hall. And basically they would just be like, all right, y'all have 3 minutes. We're going to come back and y'all just need to decide who this is. And if you don't, everyone's getting paddled. And so, that happened fairly regularly. A lot of times you would just have to go to the bathroom, dude. So you would be like, at a certain point of needing to go to the bathroom, you're like, hey, fuck it. If I get paddled, I get paddled. And if they do the whole come around and say, who was that in the picture? Because it's not obviously me, I'll own up. And, it didn't happen all the time, but maybe once a week or every couple of weeks, this was fairly par for the course type thing to have happen. And so we had this one kid in our hall. I'll just say his last name was Lucy. And that wasn't his actual last name. This is the one name I might not want to use. Like, a girl's first name was his last name. And this kid was also just, he was a little chubby, not confident. And, I was always nice to this kid. Most of my buddies were pretty nice to this kid, but he just got picked on all the time. This particular young guy just starts to have a tougher and tougher and tougher and tougher time. And one night, he decided to try to contact his dead grandfather via a seance with, and from what I understand, was just trying to get some guidance. He's getting beat up a lot. He's having a tough time, and he's reaching out to his recently deceased grandfather that he was really close to for guidance. So kind of sweet, a little weird, a little whatever, but whatever. And the way we heard about this is his roommate is like pretty Christian and that kind of thing. And so he was a little uncomfortable, was a little freaked out when he's doing, trying to contact his grandfather. But he's just kind of like, all right, this kid's having a really tough time. He's empathetic to that. And he was just like, I'm going to go take a shower or whatever. And he comes back, and this kid is performing. At this point, he's kind of switched gears in the seance to try to summon a demon. And so this guy, his roommate, gets all, freaked out. It's like, hey, this is too fucked up. This is all weird. No, and the way, and so the next morning at breakfast, we're hearing about this, but it's kind of in the tone of, oh man, can you believe like this bullshit? I have this like the weirdest roommate of all time. Oh my God. And we're just kind of like, yeah, that's pretty weird, whatever. So that lunch, we've heard about it this morning, kind of forgot about it, just kind of roommates talking shit, just a little bit of, drama, whatever. And we're at lunch, and the colonel calls us out, the head adult. He's like, Bravo Company, First Platoon, come outside, form up. And he hands us this picture and is, kind of hitting us with the whole, okay, you've got 3 minutes to decide, kind of familiar drill. Everything seems pretty normal. He hands us this picture, and we're just all kind of like, man, this is weird, because it's the familiar fixed frame image of the camera that's in the corner looking down the hall, but it's just like this black shadowy mass like in the hallway. So the first thing that we thought is that every once in a while what we would do is one kid would like bunny sack up in his sleeping bag so his face would be obscured on the camera, hop down the hallway, and then hit the light switch in the hall. And so, this totally shitty black and white camera just doesn't get any images if it's dark. And so then one person's going to get paddled for that, but like everyone can go to each other's rooms and like hang out with their buddies and all that kind of shit. So our first thought when we're looking at this black, blurry, shadowy thing on this image we're looking at, you go to, it's like cognitively, you're just trying to wrap your mind around what could this even be. And so we're like, all right, who bunny hopped in a sleeping bag? But it's also kind of like, we immediately all knew like, man, we've seen that before and this is not it. This is like way different than that, in fact. And I think perhaps for the first time in, my career there at least, we just kind of were like, man, no one's coming forward. I don't even know if this is a person. I don't know if this is like a glitch or what. And we're, we haven't like made any sort of connection. We're not like thinking this is a ghost or anything. We're like, just kind of like, oh, this is weird. This is kind of fucked up. Maybe the camera's fried, whatever. So the colonel comes back and he's like, all right, who was it? And dude, this is the part where I start to get like fucking, ugh. The look on this man's face when we just kind of looked at him like, no one's coming forward. I mean, I guess it is what it is. I guess you got to do us all, The look on this man's face was as if he desperately wanted somebody to come forward and just be like, hey, it was me. For his own peace of mind. I mean, he looked like he just got a text that like his wife died. You know what I mean? And kind of looking down at the paper, not looking anyone in the eye, just kind of quietly is like, all right, well, we'll talk about this later. Why don't y'all just go back in and eat? Which is fucking unfathomable at this place, that we're not just like straight to the porch to get fucking just spanked, dude, and do push-ups and all that. So that is actually kind of the moment more so than the fucking black mass on the camera, where we're like, whoa, what the fuck? And so now, we're kind of putting two and two together with this whole like, Lucy was doing that funky shit. What? Oh my God, what if that's related? Was there a fucking ghost? Whatever. We're kind of like all hyping each other up and getting all spooked out. So our TAC officer, the newer guy who had just come back from combat, this guy kind of liked us, and he'd like let us borrow books and that kind of thing, and come in our room at night and just be like, hey, how's it going? Just kind of like, you could tell he was kind of doing the little brother, reaching out to us a little bit. So we start like hounding him. We're like, dude, what's going on? Like, what's the deal with the camera? What, blah blah blah. And like, he's just kind of like, man, I can't talk about it. I don't know what's going on. But we just keep on him about it like all night. And finally, this dude, like, he kind of like just kind of drops his character of like, that he's our TAC officer. And you almost like in his, it gives me chills just to think about this, like his eyes, he's like, he comes in our room, he's like, all right, you can't talk to the other kids about this, like, as he's closing the door. And basically he goes on to explain that from the night before, there are hours of footage of this shadowy mass in the hallway. He was saying, at one point, this, at the end of the hallway, we had this kind of like glass assembly that was, I think, hooked up to the fire alarm, so that if, the building caught on fire, the glass would blow out, and you could use the fire escape. But because it's military school and people are trying to escape all the time, it's otherwise just totally shut off. He was saying like, he's like, dude, there's images where it is on one side of this glass that hasn't even been opened ever. And then in the next image, it's just walked right through it. It's just hanging out on the other side, comes right back. Apparently at some point in the evening, this thing stood in front of this one kid's door for like 3 hours, and it's this motion captured thing. So it just quits taking pictures. And then it just starts taking pictures again. It starts moving down the hall again like 3 hours later. And at some point, at like 5 or 6 a.m., apparently just dissipated. And so our TAC officer, who is like our disciplinarian, literally like killed people in Iraq, fucking country boy who's not scared of anything. The look in his eyes, like this man has got the fear of God, and he is confiding this to us like for his own comfort. You know what I mean? Like, you can tell he's just like, dude, I shouldn't be telling these kids this shit, but I just like got to get out of my head about this. The next few nights, the next like week, you could feel in our building that just something is fucked up. Something, like, you could feel the presence of just like bad energy. And I have no idea, nor do I think about, like I was saying earlier, like, is this a ghost? Is this a demon? What do I even have a concept of? I just know something very dark and primally unsettling was present and taking place there. And it was such to the point that, again, this is a bunch of like 16-year-olds at military school in Mississippi. It's the biggest just kind of like toxic masculinity fucking rodeo of just like, I swear I'm not gay, dude. You know, my roommate, we're on these little twin bunk beds. We were so scared, dude. For 4 nights, my roommate comes from the top bunk and like snuggles me on our bottom bunk twin bed because we're so scared we can't even sleep. Not even just off the story, like off the presence. You could feel it, dude. It was so fucked up. But this is a thing that happened to, you know, there were 15 or 20 of us in my platoon that saw that picture and passed it around. And, you know, a couple more people had the talks with our TAC officer later on, and everyone kind of heard about it. And I actually, later in my life, I went to undergrad in Mississippi, and I would tell people this story from time to time, you know, around the campfire. And, you know, a lot of kids from Mississippi went to this school, especially like, you know, like kids that partied hard and stuff. And so it was really common. I would hear somebody be like, dude, I'm working at this restaurant and our dishwasher went to military school with you. And I was so excited to bust you out about bullshitting about that story. And I asked him about it and he went stony white and like knew exactly what you were talking about. So that's pretty much my story, man. It's, you know, there's not necessarily a huge, you know, X Factor punch moment, you know, of like a face-to-face encounter with this thing, but it was just like, you know, the documentation and the fact that it's coming from like the authority figures at this military school is just so insane and so spooky. And I'm, after telling it, just like, man, why am I not more afraid of ghosts?
All right. I want to thank Jordan for telling that story. After he finished, he told me a little bit more about that school, and it sounds really messed up, everything about that school, even not the paranormal stuff. So thank you for telling that story. And that brings us to our next one. This comes to us courtesy of a listener named Harrison. But more specifically, it comes from his mother, whose name is Dory. And I'm a very big fan of Dory after speaking to her. Harrison, I think your mom is very cool. She told me to come visit her, and I honestly might take her up on that because we were talking a lot about UFOs, which her story is about. She had several UFO experiences in her life. In fact, multiple people in her family have, living in the desert in Arizona. UFOs, something that I've long been fascinated in. This is not really your typical Halloween content. It's definitely falls into the unknown, but I think increasingly it's being taken more seriously. I've talked about the Tic Tac videos that were released by the U.S. government, actually 2 branches of the U.S. government over the last year. If you're not familiar with those, I highly recommend going and watching them. This is, I believe, the first time our government has officially declassified documentation of UFOs and basically admitted it. I also believe that one of the main reasons that they ended up doing this is because, shockingly, Tom DeLonge of the band Blink-182 was aggressively investigating this incident and pursuing these videos. And I do believe that I think Tom DeLonge like pestered the government into declassifying these, which is a shocking turn of events. So I would highly recommend watching the videos of the Tic Tac UFOs. It's shot by the U.S. military, specifically Navy pilots, I believe. It's happened on both coasts. That being said, that has nothing to do with Dory's story. This is a story from Dory. It happened to her in the 80s. This is not the only experience that Dory or her family has had with UFOs in the Arizona desert, but this is one that really stood out to me. I really like this story, and I'm going to let Dory take it from here.
Well, my name's Dory. I was born and mostly raised in California. I'm a child of the 60s and 70s. So if it was just me in this story of a close encounter, I guess people in my family and circle of friends would probably be right to at least wonder if it was actually possible or happened, because being a child of the 70s, I did experiment with some psychedelics twice, though. But I think what balanced this story out for even myself, actually, because I had to really question what the heck just had happened to me, was that I was with my sister-in-law, who was fairly conservative, but just a really solid, like, I'm an old hippie, but she's very pragmatic, doesn't really think beyond getting up, going to work or school, and coming home and brushing her teeth, going to bed, and getting up and doing the same thing again the next day. So what occurred for this was we were on our way to our other sister-in-law's baby shower in Prescott, Arizona. And we left, I think it was around 9 p.m. We had to wait until she got off work. So we hit the road and had a really uneventful trip. We made this trip as a family, or even the two of us, many, many times throughout our life, because we have a lot of Arizona and particularly Prescott family. So as we got outside of Congress, I would say it must have been 15 miles or so, I started noticing, and I was driving to out kind of off to the side, many, many miles it seemed to be in the distance, just kind of a low flying, brightish, gold white light, kind of crawling or creeping along what appeared to be a mountain ridge. It wasn't high mountains. It was kind of like, it almost looked like tall hills. And it just kept creeping. At first I thought, well, maybe it could be a helicopter, because it was, it was really brighter than a plane light, but it was very spherical. The light itself was spherical. We were talking about things we usually talked about, which was a lot of, she and her husband are super into all things Star Wars, NASA. They used to go to every shuttle takeoff and landing that they possibly could. But this thing just kept catching my eye. That just kind of sparked me to ask her, what would you do? And before I even asked her, I knew what her answer would be. I had no doubt in my mind that she would jump at this, because I wasn't really sure that I would. So I said, what would you do if we're driving and we were approached by some aliens? And they said, look, we want to take you with us on our vehicle, and we're going to show you things that are beyond your wildest dreams. You will know things, you'll gain knowledge, you'll see beauties, you'll see the universe. The catch is that you'll be gone for 2 weeks, and obviously you'll have disappeared off the face of the earth, and your families will be like devastated, worried, probably thinking you're dead, kidnapped in the middle of the desert or who knows what. And it will be very traumatizing for everyone, but you'll be returned safely. We won't harm you. We're not going to experiment on you. And she just immediately said, no way. And I was like, really? And I just probably said really maybe 50 times. I didn't know who I was talking to all of a sudden. Just because she being Miss Space, I mean, it's something that she and my brother, I just know them. That would be it for them. It's just Star Trek and growing up with, they speak, and they still, they met at Disneyland, they got married at Disneyland, they do all the Disney Star Wars things, they follow NASA, and that would just be her dream. And so I just thought that was odd. So as we're finishing this conversation, I noticed that whatever it was had kind of caught up to us on the side, and I couldn't deny it anymore. I just knew that it was listening or something. And I finally said, "Do you see that?" And she just looked at me and she said, "I've been seeing it." And the second she said that, that thing, it's still like my heart just goes crazy. It shot at us with a speed that is just unimaginable. Like I said, I had seen things before, but never this close. And it came from so far away, and it was just there. We were on a 2-lane highway, and there were some, I don't know if they grew cotton, but some fields to our right. And so it was probably 2 more lanes away. So this thing, again, it shot at us, and literally, like 2 lanes away, it just stopped on a dime. I'd never seen it. We both were just speechless. All of a sudden, I got my speech back and I was like, "Oh my God, oh my God." I just kept saying, "Oh my God," over and over. And then she did too. And I kept thinking, like, what should we do? And so I had slowed to a crawl. And so as we were probably maybe going at half a mile an hour, after it stopped, the lights just kind of dimmed, went almost to dark. And then we heard, I don't know if you've ever been in a stadium when they've turned on the lights, like at a high school football game or something. When they turn on the lights, it makes kind of a cha-chunk sound. So this sound came on, and all of a sudden, these bright lights, it was like a grid. Okay, so this thing was shaped, so it's a tall bell shape, probably maybe a story and a half, 2 stories high, no windows. It looked very almost aluminum, not shiny. But the bottom was there was like a lip around the bottom and then a light grid underneath. So the lights came on with that chunk sound. And it started spinning again so instantly. There was no, "Oh, it's winding up." It just started spinning like a top at full speed. And the lights began to change color. I mean, it was like a disco ball, but not a lighted, one of those lighted balls in a club, doing this light show and spinning in place. And it was maybe a very tall man off the ground. It was maybe 8 feet, 10 feet off the ground. We just kept saying, "Oh my God." And all of a sudden it stopped on a dime again. And we were just kind of waiting to see what happened next. Just starting to think about, like, what should we do? Should we pull over? And the light stopped. And then instead of spinning like a top, it spun end over end, like a somersault in place, just as fast as it had done the spinning top thing. Again, with the lights, like this constant light show. And at that point, I just said, let's pull over. Don't you want to see what's going to happen? And she said, "No, just keep going." And again, I was just shocked because it was her. And we probably argued back and forth, about whether we were going to stop or not. And then finally, she said, "It's my car. We're going to go." It wasn't even like she was afraid. She was just she's not a very emotional or, excitable person. She just was like, "Nope, we are not stopping." And she was so resolute in that. That's what I couldn't get. It just was it just wasn't her. And so at that point, we're at the junction. So you turn up the mountain to get to Prescott. You go left. And we turned left, and that's the end of it. I mean, it was absolutely the coolest, most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. And we got to Prescott, I think an hour and a half or 2 hours later, maybe. And my grandma, of course, was waiting up for us. And we were so excited, and we had to, call everybody in the family, even though it was very late. And we told her, and she said, oh yeah, that probably happened around Congress. And she said things like that get reported all the time. So my sister-in-law, who had been acting so odd, I really didn't understand at the time, or even on the entire trip, what it was that she was so worried about, or what had changed her into a person who would not just jump at that chance. When we got home, come to find out, she had just that day found out that she was probably pregnant. Again, this was 1988, so people didn't have easy access to like instant pregnancy tests. And so she did say like that was the only reason, that she otherwise, of course, would have just gone right on. But no way, since she had a baby, she thought, she didn't know if they were going to prod her or do, take her child or do experiments. So that's exactly why. So that explained everything. So that's really my story.
All right. Thank you so much, Dory, for telling us your story. I love UFO stories. Honestly, I don't know if lucky is the right word, but I kind of, in some ways, envy her for getting to see something like that. I feel with UFOs, I feel very differently about them than I do with the spirit world. I don't want anything to do with ghosts in my day-to-day, but UFOs they're amazing to me. I don't know. I don't really know what to believe necessarily, but I've heard enough stories on here from people that I tend to trust that it's just kind of, there's no denying it. It's more than just seeing something in passing. These people have seen something very, very specific and detailed that they're able to recall 20, 30 years later, So even if these aren't UFOs, even if it's not extraterrestrial life, what are all these people seeing? I don't know. Many people have seen similar things that listen to this podcast. I've received many emails on stories that do not make it onto the episode, and there's similarities in all of them. So thank you so much to Dory for telling us that story. I think that's a great example of a supernatural, paranormal story that doesn't necessarily have to be bad. It could be what I consider maybe a good memory. Our next story, though, is the opposite of that. I put the Dory one before this intentionally. Our next story comes to us once again from one of our listeners who experienced something kind of dark and very strange. I really like this story. I was very unsettled by it. I think a theme in the stories that I put into this podcast, or an aspect that I really like about them, is that they're stories of stuff like this happening to people that normally you wouldn't associate with this kind of stuff happening. There's certainly not people that are out there looking for it. And usually with these stories, what I like most about them, the details that I like most are the way that people sometimes react in ways that you just wouldn't expect when having stuff like this happen. It's those are the kind of things that you just can't make up. So I'm going to let our next guest take over. This story comes from Tommy in California. For a variety of reasons, I'd say this is a very but still type of Halloween story. So I'm going to let Tommy take it from here.
My name is Tommy. I live in Southern California, and I have a story that involves one of my ex-girlfriends. I started dating her when I was right about to turn 21. I'm 28 now, so 7 years ago. We met through a friend and started hanging out. She was super cool, super funny. We would hang out like every night. I'd go stay at her house and just have a good time. And then probably just a few weeks into it, she started telling me about how like these people come and visit her at night at the edge of her bed and just stand there. And I asked her like what they're there for and stuff, if she knows, and she said no, they kind of just stand there and are there. And she started showing me all these drawings of these like figures that are standing there, and like some of them are just like dark shadowy like male figures, and then like one of them was like this old decrepit lady, like I don't know, it was insane, but she'd draw every single one of them that she saw, and she said it was pretty much every night. So I didn't really think much of it at that point because nothing ever happened and we were hanging out like every night, so whatever. So time goes on and I find out she's into, you know, like different stuff like that. Like, I don't know if she's like into witchcraft or something, but she's definitely into like learning about it and watching stuff about it and everything. It wasn't like, oh shit, like this girl sees some stuff. It was just like, well, that's crazy. You know what I mean? Because like, I don't know, it never happened to me when I was with her. So I don't know if I didn't believe her or what, but she was just like hot and funny. So I just like ignored it, I guess. So nothing really ever happened to me. Like when I was with her or anything, like in the morning, she'd be like, oh, like this person like was at the edge of my bed, you know, just the same thing all the time. But so like a month or two into our relationship, we're going to watch her friend's house for her because she has a few dogs, and her boyfriend were like going out of town. So we go over there, and it's like super nice house, chill, just like having a good time, whatever. She tells me about, and I don't know if she told me about it right then or if she told me like before that, but the friend's house that we were watching, her ex-boyfriend had died. And I guess it was like her ex-boyfriend that she was supposed to like marry, you know, like he was like the one, and he ended up passing away. So, all right, whatever, everything's good. We go lay down in bed that night, and we're just like laying there with the lights on, like on our phones, chilling. And then this like disgusting feeling comes over me, like when you hear like the worst news possible, like sick to my stomach, like almost my hair's almost standing up, just like classic horror movie type thing. And it was it was so strong that like it was taking over the whole room. And I asked her, I was like, hey, do you feel that? And she's like, yeah, just ignore it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, how do you just ignore that? It's like debilitating, like random feeling coming from nowhere. And she's like, just ignore it. So I'm like, okay, I don't know how to ignore this. And there's like a ceiling fan. All of a sudden the little balls that dangle down started kind of bouncing around as if the fan was on, but the fan was off. And I was like, what the fuck? Like asking her like, yo, like, are you witnessing? Because she's just like sitting there on her phone like, while this is happening. And she's like, yeah, just ignore it. Like it wants you to give it attention, so just ignore it. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, why is this so normal to you? Why do you know what to do? You know, like all this stuff. So that just goes on for like 10, 15 seconds. And so I'm laying there and I'm literally like shaking, like I feel like my life is going to end. And she's just laying there like totally normal. So there's a bathroom right outside the door next to the room. And then you can hear in there, all the cabinets just start opening and slamming. And the drawers are just opening and shutting, just shit getting like pushed everywhere, like stuff falling, like loud. And it's not like you hear in movies where it's like one thing gets knocked over and they're like, oh my God. It was like solid like 30 seconds of just like stuff slamming in that room, like nonstop. And I'm literally just sitting there like about to cry. She's just sitting there totally normal. And then it starts getting like so intense. She's like, make white light. And I'm like, what? I don't know what that is. And she's like, close your eyes and like make a bright light with your eyes closed, like in your head. And I'm like sitting there trying to do it. And I don't even know what she's talking about. So I'm like closing my eyes, trying to do it while this is still going on. And it's like stuff slamming around and stuff. I mean, it doesn't work, obviously. It stops in the bathroom, but that feeling is still in there. And it's just like, you just feel like there's like a herd of people standing around you and you can't see them. And so like it stops for a second and like I'm sitting there like, I don't know what the fuck to do. She's like, just chill, like being all normal, like not even like, oh, it's gonna be okay. She's like, just chill out, just ignore it, ignore it. So then the room in front of that room is an office. And then after the bathroom, then in the office, it starts getting super loud, and you could hear like a chair on wheels, like swinging around the room, like hitting counters, like all this stuff, just like someone's running their arm down a shelf, knocking everything off of it. It was just crazy. That went on for another like minute. Like it wasn't 10, it was like minutes that this was happening. And I was just sitting like, it feels like I was in a dream, but same thing coming from her. I was like, are you here? Like, are you in the same room as me? Because this is like fucking insane. Like, how are you just sitting there? And she's just totally normal, like still just like, yeah, just like make white light, ignore it, just ignore it. I'm like, okay, well, there's no possible way to ignore it because it's literally like consuming the entire house. So eventually, like the noise and everything stopped, but I never turned the lights off that night. And this was probably at like midnight. I had to work at 6 a.m. So we're just like, after it all stopped, we're just like still laying there. And then that disgusting feeling is still in the room. You know what I mean? And it's not moving stuff around anymore and stuff, but it's there after I'd say a solid like 3 or 4 minutes straight of just like doing damage to every room. So we're just laying in bed like the rest of the night, and she just like goes to sleep like totally normal, like nothing even happened. And I'm seriously laying there all night, like shaking. And she drove, so I can't just like dip out. And I don't want to leave the room because all the stuff that was happening. So I'm just going to hold my pee and, you know what I mean? Like curl up in a ball on the bed. So I didn't sleep that night. I had to call out of work. And then the next day in the morning, I just like walked straight out of the house. I didn't look at anything. I just left because that was like tormenting, dude. And she said that there was like stuff all over the office. Like it was like fucked up, but I was too afraid. So I just literally ran out the door and I didn't look like anywhere. I just like pretty much closed my eyes and ran. It was super scary. And she, same thing, was just like, yeah, it happens. So for someone to be that normal during that must have some pretty fucked up stuff happening to them, you know? And now, like, I have issues like sleeping by myself in my house just because that feeling, like, I'll never forget it. And it was like such a disturbing feeling of like being watched and someone right next to you and you can't see them. So like sometimes when I go to sleep, like I can't sleep because I keep anticipating that feeling coming, you know what I mean? And before then I would just like go to sleep. But ever since then, all that stuff, I feel like I'm kind of just like always waiting for that to happen at night.
Welcome back. That one really unsettled me. I think partly because of that description he gave of that feeling that came on before, and obviously how extreme the situation was. Just absolutely bonkers. I talked to him a bit more about this after. This is technically a comedy podcast, and there's a detail, and by providing it to you, I do run the risk of subtracting from how scary the story is, even though it shouldn't. But there's something that he told me after we finished recording that just made me laugh really hard, and I feel like I'll be holding out on you if I didn't play this for you. I mean, I assumed that this was the breaking point, and he ended the relationship finally after this happened. So I asked him about that, and this is what he said. How long did you end up dating after this?
We dated for like probably like 9 or 10 months, and then we broke up and got back together for another probably like 3 months, and then she called me and broke up with me.
Wait, she's the one that broke up with you after all this?
Yeah, this happened like in the beginning, like probably
dude, this is a big reveal.
Like a couple months, because I remember I was still working at this grocery store. So it couldn't have been more than like 3 months of us being together that this happened.
Bro.
Yeah. But like I said, dude, she was like so fucking hot and like funny and stuff. So I was just like, man, whatever. Like, not at that point I was like freaked out, but like it was really fucked up. Like I wasn't expecting like a ghost thing to be like that, you know? Yeah.
So the poltergeist apparently was not enough to end that relationship for him. In fact, he stuck around for another 9 months after his girlfriend told him to ignore the poltergeist destroying the house around them and just chill out. He stuck around for 9 months until she broke up with him. I don't know. I still find myself laughing about that, but I don't know. Who am I to judge? You could find yourself doing some funny things when you're young and working at a grocery store. So Tommy, I think you're kind of an idiot for that one, but thank you for telling the story. And Jesus, that's I'm glad nothing's happened to you ever since. All right, our next story is also going to be our last story for part 1 of this year's Halloween special. And this one is very different. It's also longer. Both parts of this year's special are going to end with longer stories. The reason this story is different is that it's not paranormal at all. Nothing, no ghosts, no grim reapers, nothing like that. But it is extremely frightening to me, even though it's not paranormal. In fact, I think maybe this story is even more frightening because it completely takes place in what we would call the real world. This really happened to this guy, and there's not really room for skepticism in the same way that you could be skeptical about a ghost story or tell yourself you don't believe in ghosts. This is just something that was really frightening that happened to one of our listeners. And although all of these stories do come from listeners or their family members, I will say that this person is a very active listener. They're going to remain anonymous, but I mean, a lot of these people that email in the stories, I'm seeing their name for the first time. I've seen this person's name before. If you are a member of our Discord, you've probably interacted with them before, or at least like seen their username. So I'm going to let them take it from here in a second, but I feel like that'll be relevant information because given the nature of what this story is and what happened to them, I was very surprised to find out that they went through something like this very recently. So with all of that being said, I'm going to let them take it from here.
So I probably should use my name, but I don't know. Like, it's kind of, we'll get into that, why I kind of don't want to, but kind of do at the same time. But I'm originally from Colorado. I'm currently in Thailand. I've been here like over a year now. I've always like worked like odd jobs and just like random gigs on Craigslist, just like I've never really like had any like weird instances. It was always just like quick money, like I've been in like clinical studies. I've done like weird like psychological studies. I've basically been like a guinea pig. This one in particular kind of stood out because it was like the literal dream job, like ad, and you always have that kind of like, oh, maybe it's too good to be true, but it was for this Moroccan actor. It was like a personal assistant type job where, there was going to be an allowance of like $600 per month, all expenses paid, travel-wise, like all accommodation, like everything just covered. And then on top of that, an allowance to like help this guy like record this like documentary about like his life and like traveling and all this stuff. So he just needed someone to kind of like do all the logistics for like planning trips and like securing hotels, yada yada yada. And so I was like, okay, that's like I've worked really like diverse jobs, and I felt like that would be like right in my alley in terms of like, okay, I get to travel, get out of the US, and I get to like just have everything covered. I responded, and so this guy had like an assistant already that he was like living with, and she kind of gave me the details. We texted back and forth. She's like, yeah, like look up him, he's like pretty well known. And so yeah, like I went in for the interview, and like no immediate red flags. It just was like some kind of like elderly dude who, by the way, his 80s, like 80. He's 80. I forgot to mention that. This guy is like in his 80s. He can like hardly see, he can hardly hear. So like what he tells me is, taking this position, I'm basically going to be like his eyes and ears. And, he wanted to do a follow-up interview, like just kind of like shadow him and like drive him around, just like very basic personal assistant stuff. Yeah, nothing like ever came up, that was like really alarming, until like maybe a few days before, he offered me the job, I guess. Because I remember having this like really strange dream about like him. It was like this really just dark and like strange like dream where he was in it, and like he like rushed at me and like was like vomiting blood and all this stuff, like just very like horrifying. And I remember having that, being like, like I wonder what that was about, like, and you'd kind of have these like outbursts that were kind of like, it just felt like, oh, like you're dealing with like almost like a toddler throwing a temper tantrum. But anyway, yeah, like he basically, after like shadowing him and like doing like some errands and whatnot, he offered me the job. But the catch was that like he needed me to leave like within a week's notice. And so I was like, okay, that's kind of strange. And he was like asking me to like get the money to like pay for my ticket to go, and like all this weird stuff where I'm like, okay, that's not really the agreement. But I'm not, obviously, if like I'm taking this job, like I don't come from a lot of money, and so I'm like, I can't really get that money. But like, yeah, like I thought this was like a part of the deal. And he's just acting really strange. Like whenever it came to money, it was like always very like a touchy subject. I got the job. I ended up taking a flight like maybe a few days after that he paid for. That there's kind of like this weird demeanor since like he's returned home. Like he'll call me sometimes and like kind of check in and make sure that I'm like on my way, and that like this and that, and like kind of just really like worried and anxious that I was gonna like back out. I finally like got to his place, and he kind of like really talked it up. He made it seem like, oh, he lived in this like penthouse palace, and it was like adorned with all these like crazy ornaments, like just really made it seem like he was living like a king, or like he'd been living in this place for who knows how long, I think since like the 80s. And so obviously there was like some like, I guess like wear and tear to like the place. And so it was like nice, but it kind of just like seemed like he was really trying to sell it. And I think maybe it was like a palace to him, but I don't know, like it just felt like, okay, this seemed like a little deceiving to some degree. But I got there, and I had like traveled with his luggage, and he just seemed to like, the moment I like arrived, his demeanor had like flipped. Like there was a complete different, like I felt like I was like dealing with a complete different person, because I was like in his like playing field, or his like home country or whatever, and so I could immediately just sense like something was wrong, because like from the moment I arrived, he was just like really just like intense and like rude and like very, very like aggressive and manipulative. And it didn't seem like this was the same person that I had shadowed and ran errands with. It was like a complete overhaul, and I couldn't really like, I was like, okay, maybe he's just having a bad day. Like there was this issue where I had to take some of his luggage from Colorado to his house, and he like made a big deal about how I like packaged it or something, and I had to pay like a fee at like the gate, or I don't know. So he just made this really just, it was just kind of like a red flag to me at that point. Like the moment I arrived, and this guy is like being extremely harsh for something so minimal, like something about money when he's loaded or whatever. So it started off like that. That was kind of my main thing, where I was like, okay, this is kind of weird. But and then so like later on that same day, he sat me down and he told me like, I could have had that woman, back home. Like I could have had her killed or something like that. I was like, what do you mean? Like I couldn't grasp like why he wanted to like harm her. He told me like basically like that he could have like had her house burnt down, because he's a very powerful person and has connections to the mafia or something. At that point, like, you know, I'm kind of shook up because I'm like, okay, like why are you telling me this? Like, why is this helping me, you know? And so he's just started like bickering me in the middle of the street, like very just abusive, like, you know, putting me down, like saying all this stuff about how I don't respect him, how I'm not thankful. And this is day one. I've been there for maybe 5 or 6 hours tops. And he's completely just like being demeaning and just like breaking me down, where I'm like, I'm having a hard time like processing this because I don't know why this is happening, or like, you know, what exactly this is, like where this is coming from. You know, I'm trying to be very like understanding and like, you know, try and like, but nothing's working. Like, it's like he's directly projecting just negativity onto me. I mean, that's day one. I mean, he has like a maid back home that he's like very aggressive with and like very strict, and like, you know, she's doing like a lot of like the housework. I'm kind of just like, don't really know what to make of it still. I'm kind of like having a hard time processing like what just happened out in like the middle of the streets, where everyone was just kind of witnessing this old man just like berate me with all these, you know, negative comments. I'm pretty sure like I was, just like, you know, broken down and like, you know, tearing up because I'm just like so confused at what just like what is going on. And so that's day one. And I mean, it doesn't really ever improve. And so from then on there, bits and pieces of like my like freedom and my, I guess like free, I don't know, like my ability to just be like an individual is like completely stripped away each day. Like little by little, I'm having different parts of my life either changed by him. Like I have to cut my hair, like my hair's too long. Oh, you have to wear this sort of outfit when you're like, you know, out in public with me. You have to address me by, you know, this name. You have to say this every single, like, you know, and these are all things that are like being added in on top of like other aspects where I'm not doing something right. I have to meet this criteria. And it's literally with every single aspect of my personality. Everything's being shifted, you know, to meet his needs or his requirements. There was a moment where he got into it with his like housemaid, and they were like living there, and he like kicked them out. So basically he had no maid, and I was to take on the duties of her like daily like routine. So that included like I had to like do meal prep with him like first thing in the morning. I had to he had a piss bucket in his room that I had to like empty out every day because he didn't want to go up and use the bathroom, even though it was like, you know, a few feet away. There was instances where like I had to put up ads to find other people for him to hire to like do work around the house, because apparently I wasn't capable of like, you know, properly doing it, this or that. I was almost like I was a henchman for him at this point. Like I was doing all this like really like dirty work. There was instances where like his friends would extort the neighbors like for their electricity. They would like cut out the boxes, and I had to go with them to like basically shut off their power, and so they could like pretend like they were the, you know, power company, and that they had shut off their power because they owed outstanding fines. There was like all this weird, like, it just felt like really like dirty work in terms of like nothing was clear with my job duties. It became like literally the whole everything depended on me for things to go right, but in his eyes everything would always go wrong, and there was no way to ever satisfy any aspect. And it got to the point where, you know, he would use that his like, you know, connections to try and you know, sway me, you know, or he would threaten like physical violence. There came a point where like I was kind of just so stressed out, and I mean, really just losing grip with like reality, that I mean, I was like trying to find a way to get out, and I think I would have easily just left. Like, you know, I mean, I'm in a foreign country, I don't have a lot of money, but I'm like, okay, I could technically just leave. But it turns out that he had connections with his family, they used to like work for like the U.S. Embassy or like some sort of consulate or something. So I then find out that he had previously had 2 assistants jailed. He framed these assistants of his. The police bought it, and those guys were basically still serving a prison sentence. At this point, I'm like, I don't know how to escape because I don't have it. Like the odds of me getting out of here are like slim. Like without either running to the police, without him like, you know, finding out, and you know, if he had those connections or whatever, like using them to harm me. I don't know if he like knew any of like my personal information for like back home. So this is like all things that are like running through my mind, where I'm like trying to navigate it peacefully without like getting myself killed or like being thrown in jail or having my family harmed or something.
So I just want to jump in and make sure everyone's on the same page so far. I looked into the story about these previous assistants. What happened is that basically a video came out of the actor bad-mouthing the King of Morocco, which is apparently a big no-no. It's a very, very serious crime over there, and you could get thrown in jail for it. So to get out of it, the actor, our storyteller's boss, made up this elaborate story accusing his staff and his assistants of like taking him hostage, stealing his money, and forcing him to record this stuff on camera, bad-mouthing the king as like ransom or something. And I mean, to most people, this sounds like an absurd lie. It just sounds like the most ridiculous lie you could make up to get out of something like this when you got yourself in a pickle, which actually makes it worse that the police believed him. They bought this insane story and threw his previous assistants in jail. So this really happened. I did fact check that, and I felt like it was worth clarifying because it's sort of hard to understand. Just even with the laws in Morocco. I also just want to review and touch base, like I said, make sure everybody's on the same page. So our anonymous friend here was brought to a foreign country under false pretenses. And at this point, he's being forced to work, and he's not really getting paid. He's not receiving paychecks, and the only money he's receiving is basically his boss agreeing to occasionally pay for something if he agrees with it, which is not a salary. He's also being held captive by threats and fear, and he's not allowed to leave. And if you don't know, there's names for these things. It's called human trafficking and modern slavery. I don't know how much everybody's aware of this, but, you know, slavery still happens. It usually comes in a form like this. It's less obvious. And unfortunately, it is more common than you think. It happens all over the world. It just rarely happens to Americans. So yeah, I just wanted to make the situation abundantly clear and call it what it is. I mean, our storyteller is currently in Morocco, not allowed to leave, and he's working extremely long hours for no pay. That's the situation. And I'm going to let him go back to telling the story.
My method to try and keep the peace was he was like he's like very Muslim, and like I'd never learned anything about Islam before. So like I'm in a pretty predominant like Muslim country, so I'm like, okay, I'm going to learn, you know, maybe about the Quran and see if there's like maybe some common ground that I can like at least try and keep the peace with this guy, so I'm not being like barred down every day with every aspect of you know, myself. This is kind of where things got weird because I mean I'm a pretty spiritual person, but I remember just like there being these really strange coincidences with like reading the book and like how there was just this really weird comparison between like him seeing himself as a god and then like putting himself above like God, even in like the Quran sense or whatever. And so like he was like super stoked that I was like learning about his religion, but at the same time, I mean, when I tried to discuss like, you know, try and like make him understand that like I'm learning from this that this is not how, you know, we should be treating each other, you know, like just to try and like make him understand that like, you know, but whenever I involve like God into it, like, you know, he would immediately just shut me down, like as if like oh, I can't place God above him even, because that's disrespectful and that God has nothing to do with it. I was getting paid, but this is where it got like even more manipulated. Was he gave me money, my first like, you know, payment of like $600 or whatever, and then after that he decided that because he didn't trust me with that money, that I would get my money, but he had to know exactly what each thing was going towards, like what I was using the money for. He wouldn't give me the money direct. I just had to like ask him each time I needed it. So he's basically controlling my income at this point. I was being kind of, to some degree, human trafficked. And every day it's progressively worse in terms of like how things are being, like my freedoms are being stripped away, how I'm having more like, you know, job responsibilities. I'm like, everything that I'm like doing is like wrong, no matter what like approach I have, no matter what like method I'm using, it's wrong. I'm like a terrible person, like, you know, I can't do anything right, this and that. Once you hear that enough, you kind of start to believe it, and you're like manipulated, you're like almost convinced that this person is trying to help you. So again, I have no outside contact. I'm like afraid for my life, and like my safety. I mean, there was times where I'm like, I really don't know if he's gonna have me killed. Like, would it be better to like maybe, you know, end it myself, because I didn't really know like if he was going to like harm my family, if there was like some other like, you know, instance where like I was going to be harmed. It kind of got to the point where even like stress wise my body was starting to like shut down, to where like, you know, I wasn't eating, I was like sleeping okay, but I mean there was complete times of just like complete dissociation from like reality, where I just felt like I was almost observing it from like a third person. And again, like this whole time I'm reading about the Quran and all this, and there's like, you know, a pretty common theme about burning with fire. Like, you know, if you're a non-believer, and you know, it's a really like powerful, like well-written book, and it's like really, you know, really intense. And every day there's like a call to prayer, and it's like almost like, to me, like Judgment Day or something. Like there's all these weird like instances that start occurring after I start reading like, you know, the book. It just felt so strange, because it's like he is threatening with fire, you know, that, oh, he's gonna burn, you know, this lady's house down, or, you know, have me killed, you know, or whatever. And it's like in this book too, it's like the same theme, where it's like, if you don't do this, you're going to hell. And at this point I'm like, oh, I'm like already in hell. Like this is like, my life is gone. I have no like free time. I'm like with this man like every day from 9 a.m. till about 10 p.m. at night, doing every single thing that I have to please him. The weirdest part is that like this is all happening inside his house, but anytime we went out, people know him. They're wanting to take pictures with him. I'm always having to take photos. Everyone like in his hometown knows who he is, and like knows that he's like, you know, pretty predominant there in terms of like levels of fame or whatever. So this whole time, like I'm out in public with him, and I don't think anyone has any awareness what is happening like back home. They just assume like, oh, this guy's, you know, his assistant and American, and, you know, whatever. But I mean, again, there's instances where he's completely like berating me in public in front of people, like breaking me down, where I'm just, in tears or like trying to like protect myself. I don't know how to ask for help from anyone because, again, this is his playing field. I mean, the whole time I'm trying to figure out ways I can escape. There's even days where I'm like, either he's going to kill me or I'm going to have to like kill him to get out, because there's really like, I don't know who to turn to. I don't know. And I've never like thought about that in my life, but this was like to a point where it's like do or die, or like, because I wasn't sure how credible his threats were to me or, my family, or even now I'm not really sure. So we had booked a trip to tour through Europe. He paid like $14,000 for this like almost like 40 days of just like traveling through Europe. Our first stop was in Barcelona. There was something inside that told me, like, as all this is going on, like at his house in Morocco, to just stick it out. Like, wait till you get to Spain. Like, there's like almost an inner voice guiding me to tell me like, hold out, like don't try and leave. Just once you get to Spain, you'll know what to do. You have to wait. And I remember especially one particular night, like at his penthouse, this weird kind of like omen where like it involved these like seagulls, witnessing them, how they kind of glided through the air and how they like were able to make it across from Morocco to Spain just by like, the resistance of the wind. They kind of were able to float. And so I remember seeing that and like, again, reading like some passages from the Quran that like synced up perfectly. To me, this is like do or die, religiously. And so we get to Barcelona, and I remember telling me that like myself that, even though he threatened to like, break glasses on my head and like have me killed, or, all these various things to kind of keep me in line, he never actually like laid hands on me or anything. But I always told myself like, my boundary, like I can take this shit, like, but the moment he tries to like, lay hands on me, I'm done. I'm not myself at this point. Like I'm kind of still like, I think I've developed some sort of like Stockholm syndrome, so I'm still like in it. I'm still thinking like, oh yeah, we're gonna go on this tour. There comes a point where, we get into this argument, and he basically like grabbed me to try and like, he's not like, I'm not scared of an 80-year-old man. It's more just like the fact that he tried to, force me to do something like physically. At that point, like I was like, okay, this is it, I'm done. Like I'm not, if this goes on anymore, like he's going to harm me. We're going to be traveling, like there's going to be an intersection point where he probably will meet with his connections, and I don't want to find out what's going to happen to me. At this point, I'm like talking to the Airbnb host about how I need to escape because this man has like kept me as like a servant for the past month in his penthouse, and that like I need to leave. Like there's if I don't leave now, I don't think there's going to be another opportunity to, or something inside was just telling me to like get out because there's not going to be another window. So I collaborated with like the Airbnb host. I waited till he like took a nap, packed all my possessions that I had into like a grocery bag, and yeah, I left. And I thought that was it. I thought I wouldn't have to like ever experience like anything to do with him again, but he, at this point, because he found that I left and the host told him, he claimed that I had stolen like $1,700 from him. And so I'm like moments away from like taking this car away from him, like at to a whole different city nearby. There's only a very small window, but they're telling me like the host is telling me I need to go back because the police are there, and that he's claiming that I stole money. And so, I mean, the police are interviewing me thinking that I stole money from him, which I didn't. I mean, and he's basically trying to have me like arrested the police ended up not believing him. He tried to claim I had stolen like other stuff from him, like a camera, and so when they found a camera that was mine and they asked him to describe it, he couldn't even, accurately depict it or whatever. So they just kind of like were convinced that he was bullshitting, and they had no real case against me or whatever. So I ended up barely like catching my ride. He actually had the Airbnb host call me to like threaten me, to like say all this stuff about how I'd fucked up and I'd lost him his money, and that the mafia this and that. That's the last I heard of him. I mean, there was just kind of a weird again, like lingering sensation after, like where I wasn't really ever like ever normal from it. This happened last year in June, and I mean, after I escaped, I mean, life was like the best it's ever been, literally, because I mean, since I got out of that situation, I lived probably like to the maximum that I've ever done. I don't think I ever wanted to take life for granted again after that moment. I haven't been back to the US in a year. I mean, I've been like still traveling. I'm stuck abroad now in like Thailand, but after that month of hell, like it's been literally heaven. Like I still kind of question, like, did I die? Did I maybe throw myself off the like, did he have me like, I don't know. Like I kind of feel like there's still aspects of that month that haven't really come full circle, so I'm still a bit in disbelief.
All right, I want to thank our anonymous guest for telling that story. I know this was a hard one to tell. Like I said before, this is one of our very active listeners, and I was mainly concerned after hearing this story. I wasn't excited to get a good ghost story. I was mostly just concerned for this guy. And I can assure you we had a long conversation after, and if you're thinking of things that you want to recommend to him in your head right now, I can assure you I probably recommended all of those things to him. I can also assure you that they're doing good right now. They have not returned to the United States yet, but they're doing well. Basically, I think they are just traveling and mentally unwinding a bit after all of this happened. This did happen very recently, but they're traveling and like finally, taking the vacation that they wanted to originally before heading back, and then coronavirus happened. So they've been kind of stuck in Thailand, but that's not a bad place to be stuck right now. I will say that. That being said, this is one of our listeners. They didn't ask me to do this, but I really wanted to do it. I told them to create a Cash App account in case anybody wants to throw them a few dollars. Don't go overboard, but they are stranded in Thailand, and they were recently human trafficked. And this is one of our listeners. So if you wanna Cash App them a few dollars, their Cash App is Alter, ALTAR EDEGO. I'm gonna put that in our description as well, the description of the episode. Don't go overboard. Everybody's hurting during coronavirus right now, but if you want to cash out them a couple bucks, their link will be in the description. He also suggested that instead of donating to him, you could donate to a local human trafficking prevention organization where he's living now in Thailand. It's called Daughters Rising. This specifically helps prevent and rescue women who are human trafficked. I'll put a link to that in the episode description as well. With that being said, I'm very grateful to hear that he's doing well. This was a horrifying story. I also want to point out that I did ask, after hearing all this, I asked if he was listening to the podcast while all of this happened, and he said he was. At night, I guess, like after the guy would fall asleep, he would have like a little bit of time to himself, and he was listening to But Still in Morocco, which is one of the craziest things I've ever heard. I mean, you make these episodes, we record them in my house, and then you post them, and you don't know where they go in the world or who listens to them. And this is by far the most extreme place and situation that I've ever heard of. Yeah, but still being listened to. So it's very strange to know that, but more than anything, I'm just glad that they're okay. Glad to hear that they're doing good. Had I known that a victim of human trafficking was listening to our podcast in their small window of freedom, I probably would have tried to say something more insightful on our podcast episodes than what we normally talk about. But that being said, hindsight vision is 20/20, they say. So, unfortunately, this brings us to the conclusion of part 1 of this year's Halloween special. Yeah, but still, Halloween 3. We will be back next week with another episode. I want to thank you so much for listening to this. I put a lot of work into these episodes. It's absolutely a labor of love, working on these all month. My biggest concern is that these are all listener-submitted stories, and I'm just concerned that we're gonna run out of listener stories next year. So I figure either we have to get new listeners, or you guys need to go out and have more paranormal things happen to you. One or the other. Please spread the word about this episode. Recommend it to friends. Do whatever you can. Makes me happy to know that people enjoy them. So spread the word if you like this episode. Retweet the post, etc. Thank you for listening. Music this week is brought to you by North Americans. North Americans has a new record out called Roped In. Also from the band Bong Ripper. And our theme song this week is by Entombed. So once again, thank you to everybody who sent in stories. Thank you to everybody that appeared on this episode. If you sent in one that didn't make it on, I want to thank you as well. And most of all, thank you for listening, and thank you for being our patrons. Stay tuned for next week. We'll have part 2 of this year's Halloween special. All right, everybody, welcome back. This is part 2 of the Yeah But Still Halloween special, the third annual Yeah But Still Halloween special, I should add. If you're just joining us for the first time this week, part 1 already came out. This year is a 2-part episode. And if you were just joining us for the first time last week, you were probably very confused to find out that the episode is not funny. It's actually very serious. Brandon's not on it. And it's just me, Jack, very earnestly talking about the paranormal. Something that I have ended up being very, very into over the years, and only more so after recording 3 of these episodes. So welcome back. This is part 2 of this year's 2-part series. And I'm really excited to get into this one. So far in these episodes that I've done, we've covered ghosts, poltergeists, demons, psychics, UFOs, Bigfoot, you name it. I mean, some things that kind of defy categorization or even have a name. And when it comes down to it, you know, these things don't actually have that much to do with each other. They don't have that much in common. For instance, if we proved that Bigfoot existed, it would just be a new primate that we all know about. But if we were proved that some of the existence of some of these other things, it would have a profound effect on physics and science and the understanding of life itself. I mean, if you were to prove that ghosts even exist, it would have giant ramifications for how we go about our life and live. More specifically, how we die, I guess, and our understanding of that. So ghosts, UFOs, I mean, all of these things that we cover on here, they're scary. They have that in common, but the only other thing they have in common is that if you experience one of these things, most people won't believe you when you tell them. And we end up grouping these things into the category called the unknown, because that's essentially what they are. They're things that we don't understand, and we can't yet prove them to be real, even if they pretty much have nothing to do with each other besides that. I'd say the common understanding is that the unknown is what frightens us. But the more I kind of dive into this stuff, I sort of think that it's maybe the opposite. I think maybe that the most frightening thing is when you start to know, or when something presents itself to you and you have no choice but to begin knowing, or wondering, I guess. And a lot of these things are things that you probably would want to unknow, or even try very, very hard to unknow. A lot of things that I've covered on this episode when I've talked to people, or previous episodes especially, are things that leave me wondering, how does this person just kind of continue on with life after seeing something like this? It's just everything is changed when you see something like that. I think a lot of people have no choice but to just try to forget it and unknow it, because it's easier. It's easier to go through life just accepting the fact that you don't know, and not even thinking about this stuff. There's so many things in the world that we don't know and don't understand. And if we're constantly thinking about them, the fact that we don't know why most things exist or happen, I mean, that's just a terrifying way to live. So I think us as humans, we've kind of become cocky as a defense mechanism. We assume that there's an answer for most things. We assume that there's an answer out there. Somebody has an answer, I'm sure. You know, that's kind of what we tell ourselves walking around. But in reality, we don't know much. Like, science does not have an answer for a lot of very, very basic things. I mean, we don't even know why we dream. They haven't figured out an explanation of why we have dreams yet. There's theories, but we don't know why that happens. And dreams are really, really weird. I mean, the fact that this happens to us is very weird. And I assume we've just gotten used to it and accepted this as normal because it happens so frequently, pretty much every night to most people. So yeah, there's a lot of things like that, like dreams, that we don't really understand. We just think we do. We assume that somebody understands them. And I think when you combine that type of stuff with the type of stuff that we talk about in these episodes, the unknown, ghosts, UFOs, things like that, When all of those things start to blur and combine, I think that's when things get the most interesting and also the most unnerving, because you realize how little we know in the first place. So that's kind of what I want to explore in part 2. In making this episode and making all of these episodes, over time I've started to see kind of common themes connect for me, and details between different stories. I think that's the coolest part. And also the stories that don't make it on this episode. I mean, a lot of things don't make it into these episodes because I get multiple stories about the same thing. And I just have to pick the most interesting version. But you should know that most of the time I'm getting like very similar stories. These aren't like isolated. There are definitely a few that come in that's just an absolute wild card story. But I think the weirdest part of all is that, how many common themes I see between this stuff, and the different stories that come in. So in part 2, a lot of these stories are unusual. Some of them do not have a clear ending at all or closure. They're just mysteries. In fact, our final story today is still ongoing. It's literally still happening. So it's kind of a question mark situation, to be continued. But I'm very excited for you to hear that. But these are all stories that force us to reckon with the known, the unknown, when those two blur together, and instances when a few different unknowns start to connect and really just make us realize how little we knew in the first place. So welcome to the 3rd annual Yeah But Still Halloween special. I'm your host, Jack, and this is part 2. All right, so I want to start out part 2 with a story that's a little different than the rest of them. This is kind of a warm-up story, too, I'd say. I almost didn't use this one, but something kept bringing me back to it. And I mean, you'll see later that I kind of did some research about this after the fact as well. But it's different than the rest of them because these people didn't see anything and they didn't hear anything. In fact, a lot of people probably wouldn't believe them when they tell the story, but there's something about it that I really liked. The story focuses entirely on feeling something and knowing something, just knowing it, which is an important theme to me. Have you ever just had a thought pop into your brain and you know for a fact that you didn't think of it, like it just came from somewhere else? You're like, why am I thinking about that? Like truly, that it didn't come from you, almost as if somebody put it there. This usually happens when you're falling asleep or something like that, or deja vu, similar. It's like you know something, you don't know why you know it, and you could just barely grasp onto it. You've seen it before, you don't know why. And also intuition. It's another example, just something that you just know it, you don't know why you know it, but you just know it. And these are all things that I've seen these appear in all these different stories that have been told to me on these podcasts. And increasingly, I think it's something that's important. I think it's kind of like a missing link in understanding this type of stuff. So I kept coming back to this story. I ended up wanting to use it on the podcast, and I hope you like it. I'll let them take it over from here. This comes from Katie.
My name's Katie Whitehurst. I live in New York currently, and when I lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan, I lived in a haunted house. I guess this all started when I moved to Michigan right after college. I had taken a job where I was essentially working in a call center in Michigan and was living with this girl who owns this house where I chose to live with her because I needed kind of a month-to-month living situation. Over the year that I lived in that house, I became super depressed and started keeping really strange hours. And over the course of that year, I started becoming really convinced that the basement was haunted and becoming really convinced that I was insane for believing that. So I had these kind of competing feelings within me of, oh my God, I'm insane. Why do I believe that this house is haunted? And oh my God, why am I choosing to live in this haunted house? And why am I doing this to myself? So you'd walk down these stairs into the basement, and there was one room at the bottom of the stairs that was completely finished. So there was closets built in it. There was like old, like 70s style, like wooden paneling on the walls. And then there was like green, almost like astroturf carpet that was really stained. And then the rest of the basement outside of that room was completely unfinished with no lights in it. So you'd have to go to the washing machine and you'd have to pull this like red satin ribbon on a chain to turn the lights on, and then the lights would flicker between the mirrors and then it would turn on. And she was like, something about that like red satin ribbon, anytime we'd have to pull it and like look into the mirrors, is like really what made me convinced that that basement was haunted. I think that it's always when I had those feelings of being insane, there were so many competing feelings of me of like all basements are creepy. I remember as a kid running up and down the stairs with my brother when our parents would send us to get stuff out of the basement, that feeling of not needing to be there. But I think the specificity of like every time I would walk down there, it would be a feeling of like a child being dragged down the stairs and like stuffed into the like closet where the laundry machines kind of backed up against the closets. And then this feeling of like closing your eyes as you'd pull that like red ribbon of not wanting to see what was going to happen when you turn the lights on at the bottom of the stairs. This feeling of knowing that something had happened and being afraid to see if there was actually something down there just really lingered. The energy doesn't say it was like a child that died under like an accident. It said something like something terrible happened where it was like a drag down the stairs and like kept in this space. The stairs in particular for me, just like I always got the feeling of like getting dragged down the stairs. None of the other areas of the house I ever felt were haunted. It purely felt like the basement was the issue. And I had these like competing feelings about it until basically a year after I moved to New York, maybe 2 years. My former roommate, Michaela, came and visited me in New York. So Michaela and I sat down for that like typical friend from like out of town dinner. And we started catching up on life, what had been going on with us. But she mentioned to me kind of offhand that she had moved houses because she couldn't take it anymore. And I was, of course, a little hesitant to ask, but I was like, hey, what's going on? Not to be weird, but what did you mean you couldn't take it anymore? And she responds back to me and she's like, hey, this is going to sound insane, but yeah, actually there was this thing. And I yelled back, stop, at her. And I was like, I know exactly what you're going to say. Let's both type it out on our phones and show each other at the same time. So we're looking up at each other in reassurance. We're both kind of like freaked out, knowing what the other is going to say, but not acknowledging that we had both felt this way. So we kind of say 1, 2, 3 in unison, and we flash our phones at each other. And Michaela's phone says, dead child haunted the basement. And mine says, little girl dragged down the stairs, died in the basement. We both kind of looked up at each other and gasped because we had both lived in this house for 6 months together. We both hadn't visually ever seen a ghost. We just knew that this was true. And we had this like sense of dread and knowledge that would fill us whenever we'd go into the basement. And so we're talking to each other, and I was like, that's why I'd always do laundry and make you go down with me. And she was responding, that's why I always would use the washing machine while you were using the dryer. So after I had talked with her, I came home to my New York apartment, and was talking with my roommate, who I'd also met in Michigan. Her name was Anna, and she had couch surfed with me for 2 or 3 weeks right before she moved to New York and had cut her lease. And so I was like, hey, I just had the craziest dinner with Michaela. And she's like, oh, what was going on? And I was like, did you ever have like a really weird feeling about my house? And she just deadpan looked at me and was like, you mean that it was haunted? Like, we had clearly discussed this before. And I was like, why have we never discussed this? She's like, everybody knows that house is haunted. She's like, yeah, when I was couch surfing, I kept all my furniture and stuff in the basement. And over the course of those 2 years, people were constantly using your house to store shit. And nobody ever put it in those closets. They all just pooled their stuff in the middle of that room at the bottom of the stairs because everybody was afraid to tuck their stuff away in those closets. And so in talking that night with these 2 different people, 3 of us that had all lived in this house, we kind of came to this realization that all of us had experienced some form of haunting, some form of knowledge that the house was haunted, that there was kind of a dead child or a dead girl in the basement, but none of us had ever really acknowledged it because we were too afraid to admit it at the time.
So, as you could tell, this is sort of a strange story. I'm sure the audience is split right now listening to this, and I was split myself too. I mean, I was fascinated by how specific she was, but also at times I was kind of listening to this just like, yeah, this might just be a girl that was scared of her basement, which was everybody was scared of their basement, right? But I grilled her about that, and she insisted it was different, and I actually tend to believe her. It was more than just being scared of something that was vaguely spooky. She seemed to have a very clear idea of what happened in this basement, and what made me believe was that there was times where she would kind of correct me, like jump in and correct me. Like, for instance, there was a time where I said something that implied that maybe this ghost girl lived in the house, and she corrected me. She's like, no, the girl did not live in the house. This wasn't her house. Like, just stuff that like I mean, she can't know that, but she does know it, right? She has a very, very specific vision and understanding of what happened down there. And correcting me in that way, it also, to me, usually that indicates that the person is not lying, because it's way too specific. They'd have to be a master liar to do something like that. And I could usually tell. But anyway, I tended to believe her, and I was fascinated with this story. So I wanted to talk to her roommate, the one that she had that dinner with, and wrote down the shared experience on their phone. So I was able to talk to her, and here's the roommate.
Yeah, so I don't know exactly when I noticed that the house had kind of a weird vibe, but basically after the washer dryer got moved downstairs, I had to go down there much more frequently. Previously, I had thrown some boxes downstairs and was like, ooh, strange vibes, do not like this, don't plan on coming down here very often. So I just remember hating doing my laundry because I'm standing there and it just had this, like, I would go downstairs and an absolute pit would just, like, my stomach would just drop. And the thing that I remember was anytime I was walking up the stairs, so my back is to the basement, I'm going up the stairs and leaving, I would get halfway up the staircase and all of a sudden the hair on the back of my neck would stand up and everything in my head, every fiber of my being was just screaming, run. And it feels silly, like I'm a grown-ass woman in a house trying to do my laundry, but I would legitimately sprint up the stairs at times because halfway up that staircase, there would just be this overwhelming, like, something is about to get me energy. And it was scary. It scared the shit out of me. I would run up the stairs. We never talked about it while we lived there. And I think Katie's probably described it too. There's this one closet in the basement that the doors to it were always open, but nobody ever put their stuff in it. There was a lot of stuff being stored in the basement and nobody ever used that closet. And it just gave me such a sense of dread anytime I looked at it. Something happened in that closet. I feel like something happened to a kid down here. I couldn't tell you why, and I have nothing to back it up, but there was just so much creepy and bad energy in that house, and for us to both think, without ever having discussed it, that basically the same thing had happened. I don't know. I've been in plenty of places that are just a little bit creepy, and it's a different feeling.
I think that also played into that increasing feeling of going insane, is knowing that during that kind of time in my life, I was already kind of baseline depressed from working in like a call center in Michigan and not like doing what I wanted to do with my life, and feeling like you're just making this up. There's no way that this could be true. And that gap between like this overwhelming feeling, like changing how I was living my life, and like the specificity of like every time I would go down there was more details. And I think that plays out between the three stories of I lived in that house for a year, and I had the knowledge that like a girl was dragged down the stairs and like died in where maybe like the closets were. My friend lived there for 6 months and was like a child died in that basement. My friend couch surfed with me for a month, and she was like, your basement was haunted. Like that level of detail that just would continue to kind of like build out as you continually like had that repetition of living in it on a day-to-day basis, I think is what allowed me to kind of have this feeling that there was almost this medium like approach of like this, you're absorbing more and more of what this story is every time you go down there, and something's like imparting on you that leads you to, one, dread going down there more, and two, like piece this together with more detail.
All right, so I wanted to bring this story onto this episode and start off with it because of the theme, like I mentioned before, this abstract concept of knowing. These are multiple people who all just knew the same thing without communicating, and different versions of the same thing. But at the end of the day, they all knew a piece of a larger puzzle, kind of based on how long they have been there. And I'm really, really interested in this. The idea of knowledge coming to you just from a place or an object in ways that can make you feel crazy too. And I'm sure it just seems crazy. But I was interested in this one. Being the freak that I am, if you listen to this podcast, you'll know that if there's any kind of mystery, I cannot turn it down. So I don't have answers. Don't get too excited. I don't have answers, but I did obviously ask Katie if she's looked into this before. She said she did a little bit, and I said, let's look into it a little bit more. And we both started diving in. I ended up pulling the real estate records of the house, but couldn't get past the early 2000s. The house was built in the early 60s. I'm realizing now that I guess this isn't diving in a little bit. I did pull real estate records, so I dove in a lot bit, I guess, but there was a limit of what I could do during COVID without like sending somebody to go pull the records in person. But we started poking around, and obviously we started looking at cold cases of like missing girls in the area. And we did find some spooky stuff, some weird stuff. We don't have answers, like I said, but there's definitely some concerning things. Katie had this hunch that it was something from the 60s or 70s. The house was built in the early 60s, like I said. And we started diving into cold cases, and there were quite a few. And one stuck out. It was a girl who went missing in 1970 on her way to school. And this is a cold case. They never found her again. And this happened really close to the house. Like not next door, but a couple miles away. Looking at a map, it's very close. Not only that, there were actually quite a few cold cases of children. She was 12 when she went missing, but there was 2 serial killers operating in that area at the time. There was the Oakland County child killer, and that was happening in the county, one county over, like just right next door. And then there was also this guy, Arthur Ream, who is operating in the county where this house was. Him and his brother-in-law, I think, but they were also killing kids in that area. So this is obviously a very dark hole that we dove down. I definitely reached a roadblock, I guess. This is really hard research to do during COVID, but Katie said she's going to continue looking into it, and I'm eager to see if she finds anything. And perhaps, who knows, perhaps maybe we'll have an update one day on part 4, the 4th annual Yeah But Still Halloween special. So anyway, I want to thank Katie and Michaela for telling that story, and we'll see where it goes. So for this next one, I think it's best if we go to a little bit more of a straightforward story. This next one doesn't require much introduction. This comes to us from a guy named Elias. Elias grew up in the Burning Man community. His parents were kind of burners. That's not the scary part of the story. And I'm just going to pretty much let him take it from here. This story comes to us once again from Elias.
So my name's Elias, 20 years old. I'm a student. I live in Amsterdam. And this story takes place in Lansing, North Carolina. Population maybe 100 people. So this is, I believe, about 2015. So a little bit of backstory. I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, my whole life, kind of big city, and my parents were really just, Burning Man people. That's what you want to call them. Just kind of festival going, kind of hippies, kind of, business professionals, whatever. So my dad and his friend Jim, who, were then big burners and, always flying out to the desert and doing all kind of art and shit. In about 2005, they had a midlife crisis, and they just wanted to do something. They wanted to start some kind of project. So they drive up to the mountains in the middle of nowhere, and they find this high school. But this high school was built in the 1930s as part of the Public Works Administration, Lansing High School. It was this massive stone building that had been completely gutted. There was absolutely nothing inside of it. And there was a second building that we called the Brick Building that had a couple more things inside. It was a little more well-furnished, a little more up-to-date. And they were selling it for nothing. I mean, again, this is in absolutely the middle of nowhere. So they bought it. And of course, my mom and, my dad's friend's wife were pissed, but they said, whatever, and just went with it. So they started renovating it and turning it into art studios and gallery spaces and, just a cool place to hang out. It had a giant lawn where they would throw big festivals all year round. They'd invite all their Burning Man buddies to get together and do weird shit, yoga festivals, hula hooping festivals, all this kind of stuff. So it was a pretty cool place to grow up. So in about 2015, they put on their annual festival called 5 Elements. It was this big kind of hippy-dippy flow arts, fire spinning, yoga doing, art making, weed smoking festival. So that year, for some reason, they decided that they didn't want to have kids hanging around. So anyone, I guess, under 18, maybe they had been bothering my parents, or they were, getting in the way of the festivals, or, killing the vibe or whatever. So there are no kids allowed. So I guess one of the ladies that came to the festival didn't get the memo and brought her probably 6-year-old son with her. I had come up there with my friend, and we were about 15, and since we were the closest in age, they made us babysit him, essentially, for that whole 3-day weekend. For a little bit of context here in the middle, there's 2 buildings. There's the massive stone building, and it was completely gutted. We had renovated a little bit of the bottom floor, but the second story was completely like a disaster. So it's getting darker and darker at night, and me and my friend, we smoke off, or we, sneak off, smoke a little weed, ha 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 ha, we're so cool, and we lose track of the kid. So the kid runs off, and we're sitting around by the fire with the kid's mom, just shooting the shit, trying to be cool like one of the adults. And the mom goes like, hey, where's Jimmy? We'll call him Jimmy. Where's Jimmy? And we went, oh shit. Oh no. Like, I don't know where he went. We're so fucked. We're in so much trouble. Whatever. So the mom starts yelling at us. She's like, well, you guys lost him. You're going to help me find him. So we're kind of walking around the grounds for a little bit, just going, Jimmy, ba-da-da-da-da. A couple minutes pass, and he comes running out of the stone building. And his mom is pissed. He's like, what the hell? Why did you run away from your babysitters? And she starts yelling at us, why did you guys not, keep your eyes on him, ba-da-da-da-da. So, whatever. Time passes, he doesn't really say anything. So we're sitting around the fire, and I guess his mom finally gets mad again, and goes, you know what? Where did you go? Where did you go? It's like midnight. And he was like, oh, I was upstairs playing with my friend. And we're like, what? What are you talking about? There's no way that there's anyone even close to your age. And his mom's like, what friend? He's like, oh, like the girl upstairs. And we go, oh shit. And everyone just stops. Like, they're like, what are you talking about? There's no other kids here, much less any, little girls his age. And he's like, yeah, my friend upstairs. And we kind of start panicking. We're like, oh, that's really funny. That's a good one. And he's like, no, seriously, she was upstairs and we talked and she was very, really nice to me. And I start freaking out. So in the time that I had been up there, we had heard stories from the locals about, people that died at the school. The school was on a hill. In the 30s, there was a drainage ditch built from the school to the highway below it. The story goes, kids would slide down the drainage ditch for fun and they get hit on the highway and die. Like, yeah, whatever. It's just local legends, bullshit, stupid redneck stories. We're like, okay, it's a little freaky, but there's no way. He's just totally making this up. A couple minutes later, my friend, pokes me, and he goes, hey, man, let's go check it out. I'm like, I don't know. I get spooked really easily, and I was really freaked out. He's like, come on, man, dude, don't be a pussy. Da-da-da, we'll go upstairs. Nobody goes upstairs, much less at night. It's just too creepy. People have told us that they get weird vibes from it. It gets really cold up there for some reason. And eventually I caved. I was like, fine. So we walk into the stone building, and we start walking up these stairs, right? And again, this is a almost 80-year-old building at this point. That was completely gutted. It was creepy as shit. There's no lights upstairs. We're walking up the stairs. My head, or my eye level, gets about level with the floor, on the top floor. And I swear on everything, at the end of that hallway, maybe 60 feet down from me, there was this little white girl in this dress just standing there. Not menacing, not evil, not malicious or anything. Just standing there. It was basically just like the little kid described. It was just this probably 6 or 7 year old white girl around his age just wearing this white dress out of, this typical 50s mountain town, like a church dress kind of. I start screaming. I jump backwards, fall all the way down the stairs. My friend's like, what's wrong with you? He pokes his head up. He starts screaming, falls all the way down the stairs with me. We run out of the building, go and find my dad, right? My dad spent more time up there than any of us. And we go, Dad, you're not going to believe this. There's this little girl up there, and this kid was talking about it, and ba-da-da-da-da, and ba-da-da-da, and we're just freaking out and crying and dying, right? He's like, oh, I know who you're talking about. And then we get even more scared. Like, what? How how do you know what we're talking about? He's like, yeah, I would come up here on the weekends to work sometimes and, go up to the second floor and, you think you see something. It looks like a little girl, but you're not sure. And he said he had seen her about 4 or 5 times right around midnight. And that was it. And we didn't sleep for probably 48 hours after that. And since then, we installed lights in the upstairs. And, we would throw festivals after that. And every single year, without fail, people would go and sleep upstairs. And then inevitably, around like midnight, 12:30, they would move into the other building. Just freaked the fuck out. Be like, yo, man, there's something in there. I don't know what it is. I don't know who it is. But I swear to God, there is someone in there. To this day, I haven't gone to that second story. It's been 5 years. I refuse to go up there.
All right, Elias, thank you for telling us that story. It's one of those stories that's just like unique, even in the non-paranormal nature. Clearly had a very interesting childhood, unlike what most people have experienced. So I really like that one. It had some drug use, but I would say not enough. Not so much drug use that it ruins the story. You'd be very surprised, or maybe you won't be surprised actually, how many stories I've had submitted to us where it's just like right off the bat had to eliminate the story completely because of the drug use. I mean, like, I don't want to put people on blast, but just like, ghost stories that start with, so me and my friends had just taken 10 tabs of acid, or one of them was like, me and my friends both smoked a bag of K2. It's like, all right, even if this happened to you, it's kind of hard to start the story revealing that you smoked fake weed that you buy at a gas station. I mean, it's like very likely that you're hallucinating. But then again, that's really, if you're a ghost, what better time to strike than right after somebody smoked K2, you'll never get caught. They'll never believe you. And the story will never end up on a Patreon special of a podcast. But anyway, thank you, Elias, for telling that story. I hope you don't have to go upstairs again in that house if your parents still own it. This next story is unusual. It's very weird. Very weird story. But I like this one. This is another one where, I mean, I'll probably pop in at various points to give information. I thought this was a really unique story. Me and the dude who is going to tell the story talked a lot after. I had to grill him and ask a lot of questions, clarifying questions. And then he even revealed a wild fact to me after all of this. So I'm going to let him take it from here. But this is one that I really didn't know what to make of this one, but I thought it was very, very strange. So this story comes to us from Chris from Dallas, Texas.
So yeah, my name's Chris. I live in downtown Dallas, Texas, specifically in this farmers market area. So now if you look around, there's, tons of buildings and apartments that have gone up. But 5 years ago, this area was kind of dead. I used to take my dogs to the field behind us and just throw the ball because it was just several acres of blank land. But over the past few years, a lot of development has happened. This story actually takes place about 5-6 years ago, before all that development was even a thought. So again, I live downtown, kind of in between this farmers market and Deep Ellum area. Deep Ellum is a kind of a niche neighborhood, very eclectic. A lot of great bands come through there that are smaller. But we're talking, Deep Ellum is maybe a mile away as the crow flies. So one night, my wife and I are in bed and we sleep with the windows open. And we heard what sounded like just old-time Zoot Suit style Lou Bega Mambo No. 5 big jazz quartet, kind of big brass band sound. Definitely not what you'd hear on the radio, as far as I'm concerned. It sounded like it was coming from outside, but it was very muffled. And usually when someone drives by, the sound of the engine is going to be the loudest thing. I mean, this was if someone had somehow put a large speaker in their car, was blaring it, but at the same time muffling it. It sounded as if it was outside of our window. So we get up and I check outside and there's nothing. There's no cars. There's no one talking. It's just pitch black outside. So I just chalk it up to, someone must have just driven by and kept on going. About an hour later, it's probably closer to 3 a.m. now, my wife wakes up and says, someone is in the house. And I say, look, sweetie, we have an alarm. It's set. It's not going off. We have 2 chocolate labs, phenomenal hearing. They would have heard it. They're fine. So she says, go check it out. I go check it out. There's nothing. I come back and she says she still hears it. She still hears like someone is walking in the house. And at this point, I'm getting pretty frustrated. And I start to elevate my voice and I'm telling her, you don't hear anything. Listen to yourself. And look around us. No one is here. I've already looked through the house. No one's here. The dogs aren't going crazy. The alarm isn't going off. And at this point, I'm, doing that thing where I'm moving my arm up and down, lecturing her. And she's doing the same thing to me with her finger pointing that she hears it and someone's in the house and I need to do something about it. And at that point, when we're kind of at each other's throat, we hear 4 very loud thuds, just as if someone was just crashing on our rooftop patio. So just to give you perspective, we live on the 3rd floor of a townhouse and we have a rooftop patio on the 4th floor. This patio has concrete pavers on it that are fairly heavy, sizable, very thick. They're meant to support, again, lots of patio furniture and just people. It sounded as if someone was up there with a sledgehammer banging through these pavers. And at that point, I looked at her and she looked at me and nothing was said. We just sort of had this connection where, yeah, I know you heard that and I heard it. So what are we going to do about that? And we both just looked up and I'm just thinking in my head, please don't be something that I don't want to see. After we heard that sound, we both look at each other like, shit, I heard it. You heard it. And now what are we going to do about that? Because now it's not just one person in this room that's crazy. It's 2. So I just sort of look at her like, damn, I guess I'm going to go get my gun. And so I went and got my gun. And again, I'm 99% sure that it's nothing, but I'm 1% possible that it could be something like some demon out there. I don't know what it is. I'm freaked out at this point. So I look through the windows. I don't go out there because I'm not an idiot. I look through the windows onto the roof. I don't see anything. And I come down and I tell her that there's nothing there. The next morning we get up and I go out there and there are 4 or 5 broken concrete pavers on this deck. And again, these pavers are thick. There is no way that these could be broken just by a shifting of patio furniture or something happening where, something fell over. Only rational explanation that I could even get remotely close, someone might have shot their gun in the air from South Dallas 4 times, and 4 of those bullets hit within a 5 cubic feet or 5 square feet of rooftop patio on my patio. Now, No one else in our neighborhood had damage. No one else in our neighborhood voiced any opinion of, hey, I've got a broken tile, or does anyone else have broken this or that. It was, as far as we're aware, only our house, only 4 broken pavers, and that's the only rational explanation I could even come up with, and I'm not even sure that that's even remotely possible. So I to this day, Jack, I don't know what it was. All I know is I heard some weird music, and then my wife heard someone inside the house, but yet no one else in the house heard it. And then we heard 4 loud stomps. And these aren't just footsteps. These were stomps. This was jarring to where we were at each other's throats. Silence. And we both just looked up and just thought, shit. I don't know what this was. I had some property damage because of it. No one else did. The closest person to me wasn't even in town. So I don't know what it was. I haven't had anything like that since. My wife tries to avoid all this stuff at all possible. I'm super skeptical myself. I'm very pragmatic. I think there's an explanation for most things. This, I have no clue. And the fact that there's damage to my house because of it, I shake my head and I don't know. I don't know.
So I wanted Chris to be able to tell that story just uninterrupted, how he sent it to me originally. But in reality, the conversation we had, there was a lot of interruptions and a huge gap in the middle of it where it's like 20 minutes of me and Chris just going way too deep, analyzing what could have, all the possibilities that could have caused those 4 pavers to break. And I'm talking like, me and him are talking bullet trajectories. We're talking about space junk. We're talking about asteroids. We're going through everything, and literally nothing makes sense. He sent me pictures of those pavers, and they're huge. They're like maybe 2 feet by 2 feet, and then 2 inches thick, concrete. I really can't think of anything that could have done this, and that scares the shit out of me. Literally, and I went through everything with him. If somebody could have jumped from another roof, like really everything. And nothing makes sense. Not only that, but his house, it was the only house that had any kind of damage. So all of those theories about stuff falling from the sky, it would have hit other people's houses too. There was also no debris on the ground. I mean, like literally, me and this dude went back and forth for a long time about this. And yeah, I really do not know what happened. And this is a story that kind of doesn't quite fit into a category. It's really strange. One thing he said to me that unfortunately was not recorded is that he said that those bangs, it sounded like cloven hooves almost. He said that after, but that really stuck out to me as a creepy thing, like a cloven stomping. I mean, he referenced it sounding like a Clydesdale up there, but I didn't know that he meant it literally until he told me that. So yeah, I thought that was just an extremely unusual story. In that sense, one that you don't make up, right? And I think most people hearing Chris can tell that he's not the type of guy to make a story up. In fact, in talking to him, he was telling me that exact same thing. He was like, yeah, not only am I not a guy to make up stories, I actually actively avoid things like this because my wife gets so scared so easily. And if she gets scared, basically the house becomes not fun, right? Unhappy wife situation. And in telling me that, he's giving me examples of scary things that have happened to him that he's ignored on purpose so that he doesn't upset his wife. And he winds up telling me one that's completely bonkers, like on par with this one. So I'm just going to play what I have of that. I didn't feel like this is what he tells me as an example of something that he's been able to ignore for the sake of his wife. So just listen to this.
So I woke up, and again, like, I know that you can have these things where you dream and you think it's real, and you wake up and you're still in this dream state. Again, I'm a pragmatic guy. I understand that, hey, my brain is going to be weird sometimes. I opened my eyes. I saw this girl standing at the end of my bed with dark black hair. I couldn't see her eyes. I shut my eyes, told myself, you're just dreaming, and I opened them again, and she was still staring at me. And at this point, I just took off running after her. And again, my wife is super scared of these things, so I didn't say anything. I just took off after her. I chase her down the hallway. She runs downstairs. I get to the outside of our room, and I just shake my head. I'm like, what are you doing? This is all made up. So I went back in the room. My wife at this point is, scared, or I guess his girlfriend at the time. What happened? What happened? What are you doing? And I can't tell her what happened because she's not going to be able to sleep for the next day or week. So I just sort of like shake it off. No, nothing. I just got up and had to use the bathroom or something. But I took off after that girl. Like I sensed like it was evil, man. Like there was something in that thing that was there to like hurt us or something. It wasn't like this nice entity. It was something weird.
So yeah, after hearing that, I'm thinking maybe the situation with the roof wasn't as much of an isolated incident as Chris wants to believe. I think maybe there's actually a little bit more going on in that house than than he's willing to accept. But at the same time, I respect that he's a man that doesn't want to scare his wife. So, good on you, Chris. Thank you for telling that story, and honestly, I wish you the best of luck. So this next story, I like this next story for a few reasons. It's a short one, but I did like this for a variety of reasons. The first reason is that it has to do with the Grim Reaper, or the Angel of Death, as many of you would know this. I know that most people probably think of the Grim Reaper in a cartoonish way. I'm a big fan of the Grim Reaper in terms of the cartoonish sense, but there are actually a lot of stories about this figure, the Angel of Death, whatever you want to call him, or it. There's a surprising amount of them out in the world, and people see this thing, and they don't know what it is. And I could tell you right now, this is not the only story that's been submitted to me about the Grim Reaper. This is just the story that I decided to use, but it's not the only one that was submitted. I had similar ones submitted about this. So I like it for that reason. The other reason is that, once again, plays into some of the themes that I've been, that I mentioned earlier in the episode. Knowledge being presented to you in unconventional ways where you don't know where it came from. You just know it. And yeah, this is just a story that, once again, opens up some doorways into areas that we clearly just don't understand. So I'm going to let her take it from here. The story comes from Lily.
So my name is Lily, and this story happened in 2011. I was in the 11th grade, and my grandpa had been in a nursing home for maybe 3 years at this point, and nothing like physically wrong with him, but his mind was pretty gone. Never officially diagnosed, but he had some sort of dementia or Alzheimer's, and he'd just become too much for my grandma to take care of, so they'd moved him into this home. And we got updates here and there about him. The latest update we'd gotten was that he was moving rooms from the room he'd always been in into a different room with a new roommate, and we just totally assumed that had happened. And then maybe like 2 weeks later, I go to bed one night, and I have this dream that I'm in the nursing home, and my family lives in Canada near Toronto, and my grandparents lived in New Jersey, so we really only got there like in the summer, so I'd only ever been in the nursing home maybe 2 or 3 times when we would like visit once or twice a year. But it was like super vivid dream of me being in this nursing home, and I'm sort of running through the halls trying to figure out where his new room was. Can't find it. I stop this nurse and I'm like, hey, I'm here to see my grandpa and he had moved rooms and I'm not sure where his new room is. Could you lead me to his new room? And she just sort of goes, oh no, he never moved rooms. He's where he's always been. So I'm like, okay, cool. Start walking through the nursing home again towards where I knew his room was. And his room was sort of at the end of a hallway, like the door, and on the right side of the hallway there was like 4 sort of waiting room chairs. So I turn the corner and see his door, it's shut, and there's these 4 waiting room chairs, and there's this sort of human-like figure sitting on one of the chairs, just like totally hunched over with its head in its hands, like just like really sad, and it's wearing these long sort of flowing black robes with this big black hood, so I can't see a face, and it's just like totally like head in its lap, in its hands, like sad, and like you can, it's a dream, but you can sort of like feel things in dreams sometimes, and it was this super like tangible, just like foggy, sad, heavy feeling. The best way I can describe its posture and like the feeling was that it was like sort of ashamed, and it was like really sad and just like depressed, and like it wouldn't look at me, and it didn't want to do what it was about to do. And then there's this huge crash, and I wake up, I'm in my bed, I look at the clock, it's 12:33 a.m., and I just kind of quickly thought like, oh, that was kind of like the Grim Reaper, that was sort of weird. He was in a nursing home, but we had no reason to think that he was dying. I didn't really think about him dying, it was sort of something that I assumed would happen much further into the future. Go back to bed, forget about the dream in the morning. I had an English exam the next day, so I woke up, went to my high school, wrote the exam, came home early, and my mom's sort of waiting by the door when I get home, and she goes, the nursing home just called, and your grandpa died, and they're not sure what time it was, but it was sometime in the middle of the night. And I just sort of immediately remembered the dream, and I was like, oh my God, pretty sure it was 12:33. And then she called my dad, who was at work. She didn't say anything about the dream. And he goes, oh my God, he doesn't really sleep. So he was like downstairs in the middle of the night watching TV. And he was like, I was watching TV last night, and this bowl flew off the shelf at 12:33 and just smashed on the floor. So that's the sound that had woken me up from this dream, which is just like another weirdness to it. And then we'd asked the nursing home in the end if he had ever moved rooms, and he had actually never moved rooms, unbeknownst to us. So the nurse in the dream was right.
All right, welcome back. I really was interested in that story. Like I said, the Grim Reaper, it's strange. We're all so used to this figure, but I'm telling you, this is not the first story I've heard like this. And it's really fascinating. Also, I mean, in terms of her grandpa dying and her knowing before it even happened, and mind you, I should point out, if it wasn't clear enough, her grandpa was not sick or anything. It was really random when he died. I mean, he was old, but it was not on her mind. I take a lot of things like that into account when people tell me stories. You know, your mind can be very powerful. If something's in the back of your head, it could come out in different ways. But it wasn't something that she was expecting or thinking about or afraid of. So it's worth noting. But that being said, that type of story I hear a lot. That's probably one of the most common types of ghost story. Is they're not scary either, that type, where it's a relative dies and something strange happens either the moment they pass away or in the day immediately following. Usually it's some kind of message, something like that. I've heard a lot of that nature. So anyway, thank you, Lily, for telling us that story. I thought it was super interesting, and I think it's a great lead in to our main story for today. I'm extremely excited to play this story for you guys. This was a big one. This is my favorite story that I've heard this year. This is probably one of my favorite stories from any of the Halloween specials. It certainly has unsettled me the most. This is also the first one I've done that's not from a podcast listener. I guess she has listened to the podcast now, but this came to me actually from my friend who reached out when she saw me post about this episode. And she told me that her friend has been haunted by a specific ghost for most of her life. And obviously I was interested. This is a Chicago-based ghost story. And not just that, I think it goes far beyond ghosts. I think this is a really, really fascinating one. I'm really interested in not only the story, but the storyteller. Her name is Jessie. I've talked to her a ton after recording this. This is an ongoing saga, I'd say. It's not necessarily over. And that's probably what sticks out with this story the most. I mean, a lot of these stories we're hearing are moments that have happened to people. This is a person who's dealt with something for the majority of her life, and it's the same thing. You'll get a better understanding once you hear this episode, but I'm a big fan of this. I'm really interested in it. I'm also generally interested in the storyteller. Her name is Jessie. She's also from Chicago. I mean, I know this is my hometown. I know there's some Chicago listeners in here. Let me tell you, there's going to be at least a couple, if not a few, Chicago suburbs name dropped in this story. But yeah, I think this is a really special one. I think Jessie's really interesting. And I think people are going to have a lot of questions for her after this. And I might be trying to arrange a Q&A of sorts for Patreon members. So without further ado, this is going to be the final story of the Halloween special. And I'm going to let Jessie take it from here. I hope you enjoy this one.
Hi, my name is Jessie, and I live in Illinois. And I'm a little nervous about telling this story, just because sometimes when I do tell the story about my situation and my experiences, I do sometimes start having things happen again, so bear with me. But really, all of this started, it was spring of 98, so I was pretty young. I was just about to go into 6th grade, and my parents had moved from the town that I really grew up in, and they were moving me to this brand new house, which was honestly just a town over. At that time, a town over seems like, a whole state over. So I was having a hard time just with the idea of moving in the first place. But moved to this house, and when we first really moved into the house, we hadn't fully moved in. It was kind of like we were going back and forth from the townhouse we were in to the new place, and I had friends that wanted to see the house, so I actually brought one of my girlfriends to the house to see it, and we were down in the basement. I guess you could call it a basement. It was literally just a tri-level house, so I'll just say lower level, and I remember sitting on the floor. And we were by ourselves. My dad had actually ran out real quick to go to the store. And we're just talking downstairs. And all of a sudden, I hear the door open and hear the door close and hear footsteps up the stairs. So I just assume, it's my dad. He's coming home. So, of course, I'm like, "Hi, Dad. How are you?" And no answer. And I'm like, "Dad? Hello?" No answer. So we go in to investigate, which probably wasn't the smartest thing to do. But, here we are. We go upstairs. We're looking around, and nobody is there. Not a single person. The door hadn't slammed shut or anything from the wind because the door had been closed before. So it couldn't have been something like that. So it's just very, very odd. And so my dad finally came home, and I told him the story. And surprisingly enough, he actually did tell me, he's like, that's really strange because that actually happened to me a few days ago. And
we just kind of like dropped it after that. It was just kind of like a, that's weird type of situation. But when it really started happening and became very real for me was the first week that we were fully moved into the house. And I was sleeping in my room, and this was the first night that I had been in there. And because it was around March, it was still very cold at night. So I ended up waking up in the middle of the night and really, really cold. And all of a sudden I looked down and my sheets were actually folded over, almost like somebody was untucking me out of bed. And my sheets were tucked into the bed, almost like somebody had made my bed with me in it. Pretend like you're laying in bed and you've got your sheets over you. And then you take your sheets and you neatly fold them towards the end of your bed and then tuck them in. So it's like somebody just took them and folded it towards the end of the bed and then tucked it. But of course, at the time, I'm half asleep, I'm tired, so I just decided, you know what, I'm just going to put my sheets back on and go back to bed. So did that and woke up the next day. I asked my mom, I was like, did you do this to me? Like, I woke up in the middle of the night and my sheets were folded over. And she's like, no, I didn't do that. I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, that's weird because I literally woke up and it was like somebody had made my bed. Second night happened and same thing happened. So I'm assuming maybe this is something I'm doing to my sleep. I don't know. Then the third night came about and I woke up again and my sheets were then also tucked, folded, tucked into my bed again. So that's when I really started getting nervous, getting scared, called for my parents. They had no idea what was going on. They couldn't explain it to me because obviously they weren't the ones that were doing it. So that happened for a full week straight. And a part of me was really nervous about it, just thinking like, okay, who's doing this to me or what's doing this to me? But I didn't quite think yet like, oh, it's a ghost, because I had never experienced something like that. My parents actually got a little bit of information from the neighbors because they obviously were, just a little bit like, what's actually going on in this house because of the, experience that my dad had and then this whole sheets, fiasco. And they found out that the previous owners actually had only lived there for a very short period of time. And they had a daughter. She was around 15 at the time. And she actually was really upset with her parents because they had her move away from her boyfriend. And so she actually ran away from the house and ended up getting together with this boyfriend. And while they were driving, they actually got in a car accident and died. So we found out, okay, well, the previous owners, their daughter passed away. Also found out that her room was, unfortunately enough, the room that I was in. And it was a really weird departure that they had. It was kind of like they were running away from something. They actually were very quick to sell. They left a bunch of furniture with my parents, and it was just kind of like, okay, take the house and go. So that was just a little strange, just the way that they left. So once they found that out, it was kind of from there, a lot of just random little things happening. Like I would be in my room and the door handle, it wouldn't shake really, but it would almost like aggressively like turn. And then it was like almost like somebody would like aggressively turn it and then let go right away. So it would just be like really quick. And I would be downstairs in the lower level and even with like my parents, and it would sound like people were just walking upstairs. Like you would just hear footprints all the time or, people walking. So that was just like little things that would happen. But, shortly after the whole sheets thing, I was actually, this is a really big one. I was laying in bed, and I remember I was fully awake. I was watching TV, and my lights were on. As I was laying there, she or something yelled "fuck" in my ear so loud that it was, incredibly startling. And when she said "fuck," it was almost like she was yelling like "fuck," like she was scared. Like it was like almost like just angry. Like she was angry but scared. Like it was this like fuck, like what, like almost like, for what I can think of now is maybe, what happened to me, why is this happening, like almost like that. And I just remember laying there or just sitting there and being like, what the hell was that? Like, and being frozen and just being completely terrified. It was really messed up. And it was always in my room that things would really happen. My cats were always so freaked out in that room. They would just stare at things. Their backs would get puffed up. It was really messed up. And so that happened. And, with the cats, like that was very, very interesting. There was a moment that when I actually saw her, and that was the first time that I actually saw her, and I had woken up, which was actually it was a reoccurring thing. I would wake up all the time in the middle of the night and just feel that something was in the room with me. And it was just like kind of like how they explain it a lot of times where, the hairs on your arms will stand up and you just have this like unsettling feeling. And that's what I would feel anytime I would wake up, and I would just like, no, okay, something's in here with me. And I was facing my wall because my bed was up against the wall, and I had this desk in the corner of my room. And I remember turning around and immediately seeing this person in the corner of my room, and it was clearly a girl. She had long dark hair, but that's all I could see. But she wasn't staring at me. She was actually staring at the computer that I had on that desk. Just almost like she was dazed just looking at this. And so I had this little light above my bed, turned it on, looked, and it wasn't there. So very normal of what a movie kind of shows on how it is when you see a ghost. It was very similar in that sense. That's why I actually have a really hard time watching ghost movies, is because it is very similar to the experiences I've had. I remember coming home once from school and walking up the stairs and actually looking. I had the hallway was to my right and the kitchen was right in front of me. And I remember looking to my right, my bedroom was all the way at the end of the hallway, and just seeing her in there. Again, staring at my desk. I don't know why it was always the same type of situation where she was always standing in the same spot, but she was standing again by my desk. And I remember looking down and seeing her and immediately turning around and running out of my house, because I was just like, nope, not doing this. My parents weren't there. My brother, like nobody was home. I wasn't going to mess with that. So I literally just ran out and ended up actually going down to my best friend's house, who thankfully was right down the street from where I lived. And, speaking of friends, I had friends that would come over all the time, and they were uncomfortable in the house. I had a specific friend that would sleep over all the time. And this was actually later on in life, like I'm probably around like 19, 18. And I remember, told me the next day after he had spent the night, and he was on the couch, and he was like, I had such a messed up night. And I was like, well, what happened? And he said that he was sleeping on the couch, and he was facing the actual couch itself, so he wasn't facing out. And he had woken up in the middle of the night and knew that just something was behind him. And he was hearing breathing behind him. And he's like, it wasn't you. He's like, it was something that was seriously behind me and close to me, breathing, like almost in his ear. And he said it was like the most frightening thing. So even my friends had, just been kind of spooked by the house as well. So that was kind of messed up. But other than that, when it comes to the house, most of the stuff would happen to me. Only one thing happened to my brother, and that was actually shortly after I moved out. And he was actually standing in the kitchen at the sink, and he felt somebody take their finger and really just gently rub the spine of his back. And he heard a girl laughing, or she said, "Hey," and then laughing in his ear. So that was kind of crazy. And my brother, if you ever knew my brother, he is one of those people that does not really believe in any of this stuff. Like, I think that was also a hard thing, is he's very skeptical about stuff like this. So growing up and constantly having to have people kind of be like, what you're experiencing isn't real, was really frustrating for me, because obviously it was very real for me. But he had that happen to him. And I remember them telling me about it and being like, oh my God, finally something's happening to somebody else. Because, it was, and I had moved out at that time. So I thought that my experiences were over and maybe she was going to move on to somebody else in the house. But I was sadly mistaken. This was almost an everyday thing for me living in that house. I was constantly scared to fall asleep in that house. I never really fell asleep with my lights off. I would always have them on, or I would have the TV on. But it was to the point where I was scared to be there, and I was scared to go to sleep at night. It was very, very real the entire time. There wasn't ever a moment where I was actually fully comfortable sleeping in that room or being there by myself. It was, and I honestly, I hate to say this, but I do think the reasons why I maybe did a few things in high school, like going out to parties and drinking during high school, and it almost kind of took away the reality of it for me. Not that I had a drinking problem in high school, but I was one of those people in high school that just, I went out and I had fun and I drank, but I do think that it did kind of numb some of that, of what I was experiencing, and I was able to kind of block it out a little bit mentally by doing that. But it was hard. I mean, to this day, I have a hard time talking about it, because it really, really affected me, and it was a hard situation to go through my whole teenage years, I moved out when I was 20, and I had moved to Naperville with a girlfriend, and we were just so excited. We're moved out, and we're going to have so much fun. And to be honest, we did. And I, again, being 20, 21 years old, you're kind of in that party phase of life where you don't really think of anything else. And so for honestly about 2 years, nothing was really happening. And I thought that I had gotten away from it. I thought that I was finally not going to have these situations happen. I was finally comfortable sleeping again. I was having a fun time with my friends, and it was just it was a nice change. But I also have to keep in mind that, I was also 20, 21 years old. And again, I was in my party phase, and I always had, my roommate there or friends over. So I never really had a moment alone. And I also, at the time, was I was a corporate flight attendant. So I was always traveling. And I think that is what also kind of kept me from really experiencing anything for those 2 years. But unfortunately, 22 came and things started then happening again. And the first thing I remember happening, I was actually living in an apartment with one of my best friends in Aurora. I was sleeping, And I actually woke up, and I remember not being able to move. I was able to move my eyes, but I wasn't able to move my body. And I looked over to my door, and there was this girl, and she was staring at me. And this was the first time I had actually seen her face. And she just kept saying my name. She just kept saying, Jesse, Jesse, Jesse. And I couldn't get up. I couldn't move. And I remember being so scared. And it wasn't like a concerned, like, Jesse, wake up, Jesse, wake up. It was just like her just saying it, like just still face saying my name. I don't remember what she was wearing, but her face, it was just still. It was almost like she was blank. I just remember her eyes just being very vacant. Like it was almost like she was just staring through me. I remember it to this day because it was just so wild. It was so intense. And I had that happen twice while I was in that apartment. Shortly after that, and this is kind of something about me, like little background, I actually have very vivid dreams, and I lucid dream a lot, where I'm able to actually tell that I'm dreaming and I can control my dreams, which is typically pretty neat. But this time it wasn't very exciting. I had a dream where I was in my actual apartment at the time, and this is still when I was living with my best friend. And I had woken up just like a normal day, and I'm getting dressed, and I start walking through the hallway, and I hit the kitchen. And I look into the kitchen, and she's standing in the kitchen just staring at me. And I remember thinking to myself immediately, I'm dreaming, because I knew it wasn't normal. And thinking, fuck, I need to get out of this fucking dream, because I was like, this is going to turn into a nightmare. So I try to wake myself. I try to wake myself up. Like literally, I was just like, come on, Jesse, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. And I woke up. But then as I woke up, I started realizing around me that I was still dreaming. And I was like, what the fuck? So I ended up getting up, going into the hallway again to like just kind of like check things out. In the kitchen again, she's still there. And I'm like, I need to wake up. So I remember, this is crazy. I went up to the roof of my apartment in my dream, and I jumped off of it. I woke up in my dream again. I was still dreaming. It was almost like I could not get out of this like terrible dream, and she was in it every time, just standing in the same spot. And I finally got to the point where I was able to wake up, but I had to seriously, and I know this sounds so insanely crazy. Whenever I say it, I'm like, Jesse, you sound like a psychopath. But I was trying to get myself to wake up so badly because I was so scared that I started like literally just banging my head into the wall to wake myself up. And I finally woke up, and I actually got out of the dream state. That was the two things that really happened at that time that were pretty significant. And the biggest, and I think the most important thing that really happened, I was 23, and I was going to aesthetic school at the time. And I was sitting in the area where we all just study. And I remember seeing this woman, and she was just staring at me. And I remember looking at her and just being like, can I help you? Like, what's going on? And finally, I kind of like shook my head and smiled at her, kind of like, I see you, I see you staring at me. And she smiled back and she said, I have a question. And I was like, yeah, what's going on? And she's like, do you believe in mediums? And she's like, do you believe in like the supernatural? And I immediately, of course, was like, well, yeah, I definitely do. And she's like, I feel like I have a message for you. I feel like I need to tell you something. And immediately I was like totally intrigued. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, what is it? So we had these different rooms that we would actually practice like facials in and stuff. And she took me into one of the rooms, and she actually covered me with all these crystals to protect me, which I thought was a little strange, but I was like, fuck, whatever, that's fine. So she started covering me with crystals. And I significantly remember the room really changing temperature. It was almost like it went from just like a normal temperature to cold, like it was like chilling. And she started doing the reading on me, and she said, there's somebody here and they are trying to scare you. It's almost like she's trying to scare you. Like she's got like her hair over her face. Like she's deliberately angry with you. And she said that she is trying to scare you because she thinks that you hate her. And immediately I'm thinking, oh my God, it's this bitch. Like she's still around, you know? And she said, she goes, she thinks that you hate her, but she's always been with you. She's never left your side. And she said she's basically living through you, and she always has, because you're living the life that was taken from her at such an early age. And at this point, she's stuck and she doesn't have anyone else to like really be around. And that hit home because I was like, holy shit. Like, I guess it was kind of like my awakening moment where I really realized like what I've experienced was actually really happening because somebody else was validating it for me. And she said that I needed to tell her that she needed to move on, and I also needed to tell her that I didn't hate her. So, you know, here I am laying on this table covered in crystals, and I'm like, I don't hate you. Like, I'm not afraid, you know, like, you need to move on. And it was very awkward, but also really scary because, you know, here's this person coming through that's, you know, supposedly trying to scare me. And she said that while I was having the reading that she was actually seeing this white like apparition by me, just like holding my shoulder, like almost protecting me. And she said, she's like, you have someone with you protecting you. And that's why, you know, nothing really terrible has really happened throughout your years of experiencing all this. And she also said that when I had told her that she needed to move on and that she needed to, and that I didn't hate her, she said that she started noticing like her actually distancing herself and actually moving away. But towards the end, she kind of like turned back, like she was almost coming back to me. And so she said, she's like, you need to go home and you need to light a candle and you need to say a prayer for her. At the time, I was completely freaked out, though. And, of course, I went home and was just kind of like, I'm not doing... Oh, here, this is actually the most significant part. She gave me a name. She said her name is Christina. So that was huge. I finally had a name to put to this person, to this thing that was haunting me throughout my almost, you know, my whole teenage years and into my adulthood. So I went home. I didn't light a candle. I didn't say a prayer because I was by myself. My roommate at the time had been at work. We were both bartending at the time, and I was scared shitless. I was like, I'm not doing this shit at the house. Like, I don't want to do this by myself. God forbid something were to happen, and I brought it upon myself by lighting a fucking candle, you know? So I ended up, actually looking into it because I finally was kind of at the point where I'm like, I need to really know that this is true, that this is actually really happening. So I ended up going and I did some research. I actually looked up a bunch of stuff online and I found the article and I found out that her name was Christina. So I finally had a name and I had the name validated by actually doing my research and finding out that her name was actually Christina and that this was the person actually doing this stuff to me. I guess like from there on out, I've kind of felt a little better about it in a sense because it had, number one, been happening to me for so long. And I kind of started feeling bad for her. I started kind of gaining some empathy for her because, you know, if that was the case and, you know, she was living through me because her life was taken at such an early age, I I felt bad. I'm like, this poor girl, like she's stuck, obviously, where she's at. She sees me living my life that she could have possibly had. And that makes me sad, From there on, there's been some little things. I think I was probably around 25 when this happened. And this is kind of crazy. I was living with my two girlfriends, and we were in an apartment in Lisle. And we came home, and we were trying to unlock the door, and we couldn't get the door unlocked. It was almost like the key wasn't like working. Like it was fitting in, but it wasn't turning. And we heard we heard our girlfriend Dana, we heard my roommate Dana on the other side say, "It's locked." And we're like, "Yeah, we know, open the door." And the door opened, like the lock unlocked. We opened the door and nobody was there. Dana wasn't there, nobody. And I looked at my other roommate, Jess, and I was like, "Did you hear that?" She's like, "I heard it." So all of a sudden, I'm like, fuck, like she's fucking with us, like she's here. And of course they knew about Christina. They have, been friends with me for a long time before that. So they knew the story. And of course they would always be like, "Jessie, you're so fucking weird." Like you're bringing your ghost here and, she's haunting us now. And, I would just be like, "Yeah, well, this is my situation. I'm sorry." Like there's nothing I could do about it. But, since then I've come to honestly just be at peace with it. I don't really feel her anymore. I kind of joke around and just say that she's kind of gotten lazy, and I need to apologize to her right now if she's listening, because I just want her to stay that way. But I will say now to this day, I'm like, it is what it is. If she's still around, that's great. If not, I'm even better, because that means she moved on. I tend to turn it kind of into a joke where it just makes me feel a little bit better by just saying, yeah, that's my girl. Like she's been with me for so long. And, that's really the relationship that I have with her now. I think back when I was in middle school and high school, my relationship with her was obviously not good. I hated her, like she had kind of said when, I had that reading, like, "Yeah, you're right. I did hate you. And I do hate you still, because you're scaring me, But I have had mediums basically, throughout my life, after kind of coming to terms with it, just kind of say, like, you have someone with you that's been with you for a long time. I've had multiple mediums basically tell me that, yeah, there's somebody around you, and she's still here, but she's not really just making herself apparent anymore, because she, just doesn't want to scare you anymore.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that story just as much as I did. First of all, I want to thank Jessie for telling that one. I know this is the first time she's really told it to anybody besides her immediate friends and family. And she was really excited to tell it, but also nervous. Like I had mentioned before, she said that when she starts talking about Christina, things will start to happen again. And sure enough, they did. She called me 2 days later, and she said she had a very strange incident with things moving in the kitchen. But it's definitely something she's used to by now, clearly. This is, if you couldn't tell, this has been happening to her since she was a preteen. And now she's a mom. I mean, she's around my age. I don't know her exact age, nor would I put it on the podcast, but she's a mother, and this is, still ongoing, which I think is the most amazing thing. It's been one specific spirit this whole time. I think it's how vast the story is. It's just hard to deny, and how long it's been going on. And it's frightening, but also it's a little heartwarming, I guess. I do think it's kind of sweet in a weird way, in a dark and unusual way. I think it's kind of special. They have this almost like a sisterly relationship, this this spirit kind of like living through her, and now she's a mom. It's sort of amazing. Even if that relationship, the sisterly relationship, is only one directional at times, I do think it's pretty amazing. But yeah, I'm fascinated with Jessie in general. She told that one story about her dream within the story, but after she told her long story about Christina, she talked to me a bit more, and a bit more about her dreams and things like that. And I really think Jessie has something a little different about her. I think she's kind of like attracts this stuff. I think she has maybe some special abilities or just something. I mean, she was telling me these dreams that she has, and they're just not normal. They're not normal dreams. I mean, you heard that first one, and she's told me non-ghost related ones, and they're just so elaborate. They're so elaborate, and they're more like visions. And it's just hearing them, you're just like, dude, do you realize that most people don't dream like this? Most people just have like weird, meaningless dreams, and she's having like biblical sagas that have significance to what's going on in her life. It's pretty amazing. So I'm generally fascinated with her whole story, and just I don't know, everything about her is pretty interesting to me. And for that reason, I'm assuming you guys have some questions too. So I'm actually trying to put together a Q&A with Jessie on our Discord. It'll be me and Jessie talking because I had more questions for her. You guys can submit questions in the chat to me, and I can ask her stuff. But we're going to try to do this Friday the 30th, the day before Halloween. So very soon. I'm aiming for 5 p.m. Pacific time. So stay tuned. That's subject to change. Just check the Discord. If you're new to the Patreon, there should be an email giving you information on how to join our Discord. I want to thank everybody for listening. It's really fun. It's a lot of work putting together these episodes, but it is really fun. I do it all by myself, so it's kind of a pain in the ass sometimes, but it's worth it in the end because I love hearing these stories. So thank you for being our patron, giving me a place to do shit like this. I really enjoy it. Thanks for submitting all your stories. Thank you to the people who submitted stories that didn't make it on the podcast. And yeah, I'm probably the most amazing thing about these episodes is that they're all from our listeners. Three episodes worth, and including stories that didn't make it on, that's a lot of paranormal stories. That's probably I'm the most hung up on that. That's a lot of scary shit that happened to a very specific pool of people. I'm constantly worried about running out. We'll see about next year. I figure that we're either going to run out or we're going to get new stories, either by growing our audience or you guys need to go out and have more terrifying shit happen to you, which I think the first option's better. So if you like this episode, if you like Yeah But Still, just tell your friends and spread the word. We're always looking to grow, and I'm always looking for these weird episodes to be heard. So thank you for listening to the 3rd annual Yeah But Still Halloween special. Once again, I'm your host, Jack. Happy Halloween. And hopefully I'll be back next year with a part 4, the 4th annual Yeah But Still Halloween special, as long as you guys have more stuff to tell me.
Our fire's burning bright, pumpkin faces in the night.